Hi, Stephanie.
Hey, how are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
I'm doing pretty good.
Excellent, excellent.
I've got my coffee right here. I've got my Valentine decorations I haven't taken down yet.
Wow. Oh, I was thinking, is it Valentine's Day? I'm like, oh, that was 2 weeks ago.
Right.
Well, it's
I
okay.
try to leave them up
You leave them up for a couple months or year round.
just February.
Okay, I like it. Um, still have my Christmas tree up. It's been up for almost 2 years now.
No, stop.
Yeah, no, it's a black tree with white lights, and it looks like
Oh,
the
that's
night.
nice.
Yeah, it looks like looking into the stars at night. It's a very beautiful tree. And then I've got this cool nebula thing which casts a light on the ceiling, and it looks like this kind of swirling star nebula, like the night sky. So it's kind of nice to have at night.
Yeah, so relaxing. I've gotten gifts for like relatives and whatever of the night sky, like projectors, and they're
Yeah,
awesome.
yeah, yeah, totally. I mean, I've always loved those kinds of like glowy things, and back in the day, I would have like Christmas lights when I lived in an apartment. I had Christmas lights on all the on my walls, and there's just something about not like the cold LED lights. I'm talking about the warm incandescent ones. Um, there's just something about the warmth of that light that makes me very happy, and I think it's like a childhood memories or something. I don't know. It makes me feel very comfortable and cozy, I guess. You know.
Yeah, I love those big like 1950s style lights. My grandmother had that on her tree, and it's just like, yeah, it's nice and cozy. I'm with you.
hmm Totally, totally. I'm looking forward to today's discussion. I was reading through just a little bit of Bloodborne, and I really like what I've read so far. So
Well, that's good.
yeah, I think like my favorite line. Oh, I gotta pull it up. The day the first fangs appeared, I thought, oh God, that is so beautifully written. Like, oh, okay, that's awesome.
And it's
Um,
cool. I guess maybe I'll save it for later, but I'm writing a prequel set in the
oh,
1350s.
okay, so
So
that
it's
makes sense now with the stuff before the book begins, your preface.
right, right. And I think it'll
Yeah,
be to like think back to that very early stage when like the very first fangs appeared in the world.
yeah. Oh, that'd be awesome. Well, count me in.
Okay,
I definitely want to read that, and I will cheer you on as you write that.
cool.
Okay, well we'll get right into it. Hey, this is Mark Justice, and welcome back to Between the Lines. Today's show is going to be a lot of fun. I'm really looking forward to talking with this writer. We have Stephanie Kemler, and her brand new book, Bloodborne, which I've been reading. And let me tell you, you're going to want to go get this book. It's awfully fun. So, welcome to the show, Stephanie.
Thank you so much for having me on. This is podcast number one for me. So,
Wow,
yeah.
nice. Well, that's exciting. That's exciting.
Yeah.
Um, well, I don't know about other people's podcasts, how they run it, but I just want to have a conversation, and how I started this whole show, as I probably the people who've listened to the show, like, yeah, we've heard this, Mark, but every time I talk with someone new, I want to let them know. I've met so many great people through Instagram, other writers, and I've been just so enamored with the genres in which they write, and I'm just like, I see that passion and that love for doing what we do as indie writers, and just so many different ways I've to kind of write and write books, and our passions come out through that. And I thought, I gotta talk with these people. I want to know more about them and about their creative process, and give them a chance to kind of like showcase themselves for the world. So I'm very happy that this is the first podcast you're on. So I hope you have a good time. Um,
I bet I will. I watched I watched bits of almost all of your interviews on
oh,
YouTube
oh,
just to get
wow.
a good idea. And
Thank you.
like you really run the gamut.
I
You have
try.
all different genres.
Yeah, and that's what's so exciting. To do this is get to talk with someone who does not only just a horror, but the vampires in particular, which is what I'm looking forward to talking with, because and that's, I don't want to put a, like, just talk to people who write X, Y, or Z. I want to bring it all, because to me that's what's exciting. Because genres I would never probably think to write or even read, talking with other writers kind of makes me intrigued. Like, well, maybe now I should just give it a try, just to see what it's all about, And so
yeah, it was a really good idea. I could talk process all day. So
excellent.
listening to it, I love how different everyone is.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly it. But we won't be all day. Not for this first interview. We'll
Right.
cut it off. We'll only go 5 hours. So, um, well, let's just start back with thinking about growing up. Who were some of your favorite writers that you can remember, or some of your favorite books?
I would say when I was like middle grades, so maybe 10, 11, 12, there's this book by Penelope Farmer called Charlotte Sometimes. And there's a Cure song based on it, but it's this cool time slip novel where a young girl is at a boarding school and she falls asleep her first night and she transports to like World War I era and like goes back and forth and she gets like trapped in time.
Okay.
And there's something so imaginative, and Penelope Farmer's writing in that book is just incredible. Like not a word is out of place, which is so rare, like to be that efficient in what you write. And I loved it because like at a young age, you read it at one level, and then going back reading it as an adult, I'm like, wow, that's a writer to admire. Like she just
Mm-hmm.
really gets it.
Yes.
Um, and then probably the most influential, this is unsurprising, when I was like middle school and high school was LJ Smith's Vampire Diaries
Okay.
series. Um, and it was wild because I had to special order it from my bookstore, and my parents censored like so much of what I was reading, of course. So I think I like saved up birthday money and like snuck it into a bag. And it's not even really salacious. Like it's like
Right.
appropriate.
Sure.
Um,
That's fantastic.
and
I want to send you like $3 to do that, just to
right,
try to get a fund for other kids to bring home books like
right, a
Catcher in the
foundation.
Rye and Catch 22 and all those, Tom Sawyer and Huck Finn. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And when I read those first three books, immediately the next day, I started back on page one. And I think I read the whole trilogy, gosh, 4 or 5 times after I first read it. And I was
Yeah.
just obsessed. Like, and then I hadn't read it for maybe 10, 15 years. And I read it a couple months ago. I was like, wow, like it got in my head about characterization and about pacing and humanizing the supernatural. And it's almost as magical now as it is then. Like it was a great time capsule.
Yeah, because sometimes those books we loved as kids don't translate well when we're adults, like the TV
Right,
shows or
right.
movies we've liked. We see the flaws, like, what was my 10-year-old self thinking? My God, Um, but it's really wonderful when those things do, because you get that sense of nostalgia, like you remember, like, oh yeah,
Mhm.
you get all the good feels, but then you can appreciate it as an adult on these other levels that you didn't when you were younger. So that's awesome. Um, so are there other like vampire stories or writers that you enjoy, or was like that was pretty much what you read as far as vampires go?
Um, in terms of books, I didn't have anything of quite that obsessive level. Um, you know, I think that was so indelible. I can't like nothing comes to mind right away.
Okay.
But then I started watching vampire movies, and
Oh,
that was
okay.
you can hear my dog in here.
Yeah, no, that's fine. Let's see your dog. Well,
She's
oh no, no, that's okay. Well, that's fine.
right. And I think yeah, I think I switched to movies pretty early on, and then after that, it was like I'll pick up a vampire novel from time to time, but I don't have like the kind of dedicated obsession with, let's say, Anne Rice that
Sure.
a lot of people I know have had.
Yeah, right.
Um,
So what
I
what are
love the
oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
that's okay. I love the movie Interview with the Vampire. It's
Okay.
just, it's kind of camp, kind of. It's very camp. And then it's very like engaging and fun. I feel like I could watch that like endlessly.
Okay.
Um, and then other movies. Oh, The Lost Boys, which is
Yeah.
surprising that it kind of holds up.
Yeah.
Um,
I mean, you get a lot of the 80s tropes and the look of it. And
right,
then we
right.
were just joking about this with someone on another podcast about the scene where they're at the big, the party, the rave, and you got the greased down
The
muscular saxophone player,
guy.
like everybody who learned how to play saxophone around that time's like, I got to lift weights and I got to get some
Right.
grease, and just call me Fabio, Dr. Sax. That's
Yeah,
fantastic.
everything about that movie. That's another thing. My brother and I revisited it last Halloween,
Hmm.
and it was our favorite movie at the time when we were quite young, and it was just everything was still funny.
Hmm.
The jokes still hit, and then
Yeah.
of course like the 80s like humor and nostalgia was
Yeah.
like awesome.
There is a little bit of that. It's, especially the end. Like, come on, it's
Oh, right,
vampires, of course, duh. That was a lovely
right.
comic twist. And I was a fan as well. I liked it. I mean, it was hard not to. I mean, it's an MTV movie. It's a movie made for the video generation. Obviously, the way it looks, the way it's shot, the soundtrack.
You get the
Um,
Hames, or you
yeah,
get Corey
you
Haim
get the
and Corey Feldman. You get the
Corys,
Coreys.
and you get Kiefer Sutherland.
Oh, he's great in it.
So yeah, so it's a great movie. And I watched it last year again for the first time in probably 30 years, and I'm like, oh, this is actually still pretty good. Other movies don't live up or don't continue to be good, but I still thought that was good one. Good one. So do you like watch like the Universal Dracula movies, like, or the Hammer films from the 1950s?
I do, and I loved all of what was the series, like the Mummy, Dracula,
Yeah.
Frankenstein. Um,
Universal or Hammer or both?
I think Universal.
Well,
And
Universals
I
are the
had
black
the
and whites from the 30s and 40s, and the
yes,
Hammer
yes.
came in the 50s and the 60s. Peter Cushing, Christopher Lee. Otherwise, you're talking Boris Karloff and Bela
I'm
Lugosi.
talking about, yeah.
Okay, yes, yeah, that's the stuff of
And
my childhood.
I had action figures actually of the
Yeah.
Universal like monsters,
Hmm.
and it was so funny because like my brother and my cousins had GI Joes, and like they
The
didn't care
tiny
about
ones,
like
the
the
three
little
and a quarter inch or the 12
no, the
inch?
huge.
Yes,
Yes, with like the
nice.
articulated limbs.
Yes. Yeah, so you had the 8-inch monster figures. I forget who made them. They look like Mego. They were wearing like clothing. Is all those the ones you had? They had like
Yeah, I
clothes.
think
Yeah. There was a
it's
mummy
hard
and a
to.
werewolf, a
Mhm.
Frankenstein, and a vampire.
And I've always loved like that kind of spooky, like the Monster Mash,
Oh yeah.
um and then I'm such a huge fan of like going into maybe fantasy or whatever. All the Ray Harryhausen movies.
Yes.
I love like Clash of the Titans,
Hmm.
Sinbad, like just anything fantastical. As a kid, I
Yeah.
was just wild about.
Jason and the Argonauts has some of the best stop motion animation, the scenes where he's fighting the skeletons.
Oh,
It's just like, and you
so
see these
good.
again. Yeah. And even he was still doing it, killing it in Clash of the Titans, even though had been up there, but he had been doing it all along, these gorgeous motion animations. And uh just, you rarely get that today in special effects. It's all CG, but there's a beauty to that to me is timeless. I know probably kids born in the last 20 years will probably laugh at those effects, but those practical effects are what I grew up on and what I fell in love with, and
Yeah, I
I like
love.
seeing the jerky movement, the slightly, but
Uh
with
huh.
Harryhausen, he was the master's touch. Yeah, it's just beautiful stuff.
And I love how immersive that sort of thing is. And yeah, maybe they don't hold up for younger people. Um, but I think like Harryhausen's his attention to detail and the care he took with things. And I feel like I have admired him for so long, and I put that care into like any creative project. So he was like a really inspiring person to me, not just
Yeah,
his films, but like as a creative was
right.
incredible.
Oh, that's awesome. Plus he was so far ahead of his time. I mean, we wouldn't have like Industrial Light and Magic, George
Right.
Lucas's thing. We wouldn't have any of that stuff without what Harryhausen did. And then before him, oh, someone's going to yell at me for not knowing. I want to say the man who did the animation for King Kong, the
Oh, that was
1933.
crazy. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that was really something as well. I mean that kind of animation was pretty cutting edge, and to me that's still the best version. That's just holds up still. I can't watch the end because I don't want to see Kong killed. I mean, I have too
Right.
much
It's
empathy for him. It
traumatizing.
is. It's like, no, I can't. And the movie that really humanized him even more for me was Peter Jackson's version, even though it's long and
Oh, that was
bloated.
great.
But
Yeah.
you could really see the humanity in Kong's eyes, and like he's just this creature that just deep been brought to an environment where he's just too big, and it's not his
Right.
fault. It's these people. And I just was sobbing at the end. Like, I know how it's going to end. I've seen the movie, but still, I just was hoping against hope. Like, let this not go this way. But yeah, I can't watch it anymore. I can't watch the end. In my version, he
I
just gets away and it just goes off to live his happy
You're gonna write
life.
fanfic about it.
Exactly. Right. You
He
know,
gets Fay Ray.
yeah, why not? They had a good time. But no, that's awesome. Yeah, being horror kids, there was nothing like it growing up. And you said you grew up in Cleveland, right? So
Yeah, which I mean, Harryhausen's from Cleveland. You can't go wrong.
yeah,
Um,
were you around for like Houlihan and Big Chuck, that
I was
or Superhost and
yeah, Superhouse. Like
the
looking back,
Ghoul,
I'm like,
yeah, all those.
was Goulardi
Goulardi was in the
from?
60s, and the Ghoul took over for him in 1971. I was 4.
Okay,
I was a baby. And then like Friday night, I'm 4 years old, and I remember watching the Ghoul or for Saturday night or whatever night it was. But that's the night I was allowed to stay up and watch monster movies because I loved them ever since I can remember. And the Ghoul
right.
just made those extra fun. And then Big Chuck and Little John or Hugh and Big Chuck, Friday nights, and then Superhost on Saturdays. It's like my
And
weekends were
Saturday,
filled with monster
uh-huh.
stuff.
Yeah, and Saturdays I was introduced to so many classic movies that I think it was almost, I mean, it was Superhost, so it was like sort of hokey, but
Yeah.
they would always have this interesting commentary about, how it was made or who was
Hmm.
behind it or whatever. And yeah, like I said, it was like an education in classic horror. I'm surprised my parents ever let me watch it, but I think we were just, I'm a kid of the 80s. We were
Hmm.
just left alone. Like, like you could do whatever, especially Saturday mornings. Like they knew if it was
Yeah.
Saturday morning TV, it must not be too traumatizing.
That's right. This is your time. I mean, that's the only time when cartoons were on. Like you had your schedule. Like you're up at
Yeah. Oh yeah.
7:30 because the crappy cartoons are up at 7, but 8 o'clock starts prime time cartoons.
Right.
So you have your bowl of cereal, or for me, I was always eating leftovers. So a meatloaf sandwich or a piece of pizza was my favorite breakfast. A piece of pizza and a glass of milk, and I'm watching cartoons.
And then Kung
uh,
Fu. I mean, the whole day was taken up.
yes, yes, yeah. And then after that, like there was like Superhost would come on and do 2 shows, and then there was like an hour of Space 1999, an hour of Star Trek, and then sometimes at 8 o'clock there would be like more movies. I'm sure my dad's like, why aren't you getting outside and playing with your friends? Like if there was a
Right.
boring movie on, of course I'm gonna be outside, yeah. But if there's a monster movie on, no, I'm watching it. Because you
I
get the
love how
TPU.
much the early storytellers, like you said with King Kong, like humanized
Hmm.
these creatures.
Hmm.
Like whether it was the Thing or King Kong or Dracula or whatever, like the the actors brought so much to it, and then the directors were really helping the audience connect on like a human to human level. So
Sure.
you do have this empathy, you do have this sympathy for the characters,
Yeah.
and I love that.
Yeah.
I ate that kind of stuff up.
I taught English for a long time, and I also taught Intro to Horror and Intro to Popular Culture.
Oh,
And
fun.
yeah, and in my Intro to Horror class, we read some articles. There's a concept called romantic isolation. It's in horror,
Uh-huh.
and it's about where you identify with the human in the monster and also the monster in the human. So when we see King Kong or Frankenstein's monster, we sympathize, we empathize because we know that they're just poor humans like us. Like, just we see the pitiful nature of them,
Hmm.
and they can't help being who they are. Like Frankenstein's monster is incredibly sympathetic. But then when we see movies like The Wolf Man, we identify with the wolf inside Larry Talbot, that monster. And we kind of sympathize. Like when he starts on his rampage, we kind of like identify with that monster in us as well.
Yeah.
And so I thought that's a great concept, because that sympathetic werewolf has been around since the 15th century. That was a big thing that came about because of the Catholic Church's way of looking at communion as transformation, this
Hmm.
transmogrification of, now it's not just symbolic. When you eat that cracker and you drink that wine, that is becomes flesh and blood. And so that fueled on all these ideas that were running around in the culture anyway, about seeing very sly animals and thinking that there's a person trapped in this animal's body, or people who
Right.
were acting like horrible peoples. Oh, there must be an animal inside. And so this notion of the sympathetic werewolf became like fodder for romantic fiction at the time, where maidens are rescued or rescue these wolves, and they secretly they love on them, and then the wolf transforms. That's how we get the whole Beauty and the Beast thing. um,
Right.
and there's a wonderful writer, Angela Carter. I'm not sure if you're familiar with her at all.
Mm-mm, no.
She has a book called The Bloody Chamber and Other Secrets. It's a collection of retold fairy tales with, it's very sexualized, very violent, very bloody.
Well,
Um,
all the fairy tales were.
yes, yes. And she's bringing them back. So you would
That's
like that.
cool.
Yes, because she did The Company of Wolves is her story. It was turned into a movie in the 80s. It's a retelling of Little Red Riding Hood. And you know, I'll save it. I don't want to spoil it for you because I think it's worth the
Okay.
read. Yes, Angela Carter. And I'm going to recommend two more vampire stories before we move on and see,
Right.
because we do need to talk about writing sometime.
Right.
I mean,
Exactly.
I could
And if
sit and
you
talk for the
could,
hours for this.
about films, about
Yeah,
horror, same.
yeah.
If you could like shoot me a message or whatever with the names, because I'll completely forget,
Oh, sure, no
then I
problem.
can get
Yeah,
awesome.
I'll put them in an email. But there's also a novel called Vampire Junction by a writer named
Have not read it.
S.P. Sumto, and it is the basis. I think, I'm not sure of the timeline, but I think it's something that Anne Rice may have borrowed from. If I think Sumto's book came out, maybe I'll have to check and see. I don't want to say anything, uh, but it's about a 12-year-old vampire named Timmy Valentine, who's a rock star. And
What a name.
yeah,
Like,
right. And it's really brutal. This great, but he's building this train set, and this person's interviewing him. So it's interview with a vampire. Um,
oh,
this
funny.
woman who's interviewing him, and it's Sumto brings in all this Jungian archetype imagery as this vampire kid is assembling this large train set, and he's just spilling his story because he's hundreds of years old. He's just trapped in this 12-year-old body.
Right.
um, but it's brilliant, really good. And then the last one, I don't know if you've read this one, Richard Matheson, I Am Legend.
Uh, is it the same, like based on the same as like the Will Smith movie, or am I getting that mixed up?
We're gonna stop that right there. We're gonna
Oh,
put that
please
in.
correct
We're
me.
gonna
No.
nip that in the bud. That's called the
It was
same,
based.
and
Uh-huh.
it's a bastardized account, and the people who made the movie are trying to make you think that there's any connection at all to the Matheson brilliance. I'm sorry, Will Smith, that movie was shit, and the writer should be embarrassed. I'm calling you out, motherfuckers. So anyway, um yes, it's supposed to be based on Matheson's novella, which came out in 1954.
Okay.
It is brilliant. I strongly recommend that. I cannot recommend it strongly enough for you. I'll put these in the email, but I Am Legend. I'm sure you can find it anywhere.
Right.
But what you're going to see is what's brilliant about that book is it puts without spoiling anything, the main character learns science because he believes that what happened there are scientific explanations for things. That's about what I'll say. And so here's Matheson looking at all the vampire tropes and myths, and works about explaining how things could be in the real world, like how these mythologies kind of grew,
Right.
as they do in hundreds of years of like the phone call game. And it's just brilliant. And I would taught that in my class for years. And every student's like, is it like the Will Smith movie? And then after they read the novella, they go, why wasn't any of this in the movie? I go, exactly.
It's funny, speaking of novellas, it's coming to me now, probably my favorite, beyond the Vampire Diaries, my favorite other book is Carmilla. Have you
Oh,
read it?
no,
It's a
I
no
know the name though. I recognize the name.
it's by Sheridan Le Fanu. It's 150 years old, and it's about
Yes.
teenage lesbian vampires.
I think I've
It
seen the
like
movie
literally is
adaptation of
about that.
that. Yeah. Well, you
There's
had
a
me at teenage
couple,
lesbian vampires. So,
right? Who like who wouldn't love that?
I
And
know, right?
it's
Yeah, it's
such
count
a
me in.
crazy it's such a
Huh.
crazy story. And I would say that, and then of course Dracula.
Sure.
Like if I'm adding to the canon of what I sort
Yeah.
of my bread and butter for vampire fic.
So you've read the entire Bram Stoker's novel.
I've read it more than once.
Really? Okay.
And it's weighty. Like it's
It
not
is. It's a
easy to
thick
get
book.
through.
Yeah, and it's not
Hmm.
easy to get to because it's just a series of letters, back and forth.
Hmm.
It's something that I need to read again because I tried to read it and I got like a third of the way through. I'm like, my God, I'm so bored. I'm dying here.
Yes.
Because
Yes.
the movies that I had seen were so much more terse. Of course, you get to the action, but I understand also the context in which it was written. This is unfolding in newspapers as this is serialized. Bram Stoker's serializing this, and of course, if you read a couple pages a day over the course of 6 months or something, then of course it's a different experience than trying to read it like you
Hmm.
would a novel. So in that context, if I maybe just read like one letter every couple days, I'd probably enjoy the book a lot more. But I mean,
My go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I mean, compared, I prefer Mary Shelley's Frankenstein as a novel. I
Oh,
think
it's
I
so
think it's
good. It is
yes,
so good.
yeah, it's excellent.
And my publisher actually for October had all the writers who are with the publisher read aloud a couple of chapters of Dracula and put it on Instagram.
Nice.
And that was so funny because most of the other authors did it as kind of a straight read. I did commentary, and I'm like, it's not like an audiobook. So I
Right.
was talking about how much I love Mina. I was talking about like I even shared my recipe for like a pumpkin spice latte. Like it was just like all over the place.
That's
But it was
fantastic.
tons of fun. And
Yeah.
it's hard to wrap your mouth around. Like he talks about like Slavic folklore
Mhm.
and then like history and whatever. So it was a big challenge, but it's a ton of fun reading it aloud. And I feel
Oh,
like it gives us different like interpretation to it.
I like that. That's a great exercise too. And I
Hmm.
I noticed how when I first read the character, your main character in Bloodborne, Mina Coffin, I'm like, oh, that's a brilliant name. I mean, it's like, oh, that's so
It's the greatest name.
so good. I'm like, oh, Mina. I go, I see what you did. Yeah, no, but it's fine. I love those nods. I mean, we this is what my segue into asking about your writing. I mean, when we read things, we generally are inspired by what we've read. That's kind of what turns us into want to writing, or want to write ourselves. And it's
Absolutely.
good to borrow those names. And when you create a character name that makes you excited, like Mina Coffin, I'm like, oh, come on, man, that is awesome. Um, I have a short story that's just a supernatural kind of. It feels like something you would get from like the 1970s short story, and the
Hmm.
the main character who dies, the first thing you get this letter, like you're a family member of this person. Her name is Agatha Sabbath. I'm like,
That's incredible.
I'm like, that's yeah. It's like that's okay. Okay, Mark, you did all right with
Right.
this one. Agatha Sabbath, like that's yes. Um, that's okay. I'll take
And
that.
then in Bloodborne, Mina's ex-girlfriend's name is Lucy. And it was so intentional. And there's
Yes.
scenes where like Lucy spends most of the book trying to like uh terrorize Mina. So
Mhm.
she starts quoting Mina Harker's lines in Dracula, and it drives Mina Coffin up a wall. She's like, "You're
Nice.
stealing my lines, Lucy."
That's brilliant. Well, if I wasn't sold before, now I am like double sold. I gotta read this book. I am so excited, and thank you for sharing it with me. Well, let's get into more about writing per se.
Sure.
Seriously, we've got to just sit and talk horror. We can just do that anytime. Yes, or we'll watch a movie. I'll put on some vampire movie that you've never seen, and we'll enjoy
Right.
it. So, okay. Well, what first drew you to writing? We talked about your horror writers. Oh, I guess the one question before that is
Mhm.
why vampires? I mean, what makes them a subject matter that you want to write about?
I think partially it's what you said about like the monster in humans and the humanity in monsters. I've always found that concept so interesting, even though I didn't have a name for it before. You helped out with that.
Yeah.
Um, and I think there's something so universal about the struggle. So often in vampire novels, they're like the only one, or there's very few vampires scattered in the population. And I think the struggle of being so unique and being kind of a misfit in society, I just really I glommed onto that at a young age, especially I think when I was like 13, 14, 15.
That's when we all
Um,
feel like misfits. Like
right,
everyone
right.
else seems to have it going on except for me. What the hell's wrong with me, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
And I think the like acute loneliness I found so relatable at that age, and I think maybe throughout my life. And dealing with stuff kind of on your own, like figuring out your own morality, figuring out your own ethics. And those questions have always been of interest to me. Um, and I think with Bloodborne, and we can talk about this in a minute or two, but I invented a religion for these vampires. And I think these deep questions of, what's my faith and how can I cobble that together? And as I mature, what are these, how do I make my own system of ethics? And yeah, I was just always like a weird, like bookish sort of loner as a little
Yeah.
kid. I'm getting sort of out of that the older I get. So it's really attractive to me to have this character of a vampire that you could play with all these ideas of
Mhm.
morality and faith and
Yeah,
humanity. And
because the humanity falls aside. So in a way,
Mhm.
it's like reinventing yourself. Like when you come to a point in your life and you realize like everything was a lie or something,
Mhm.
like what happened to, like I in the last few years formally became an apostate and threw away 40 years of toxic Christianity off of my body. So it's like you have to find out who you are and reinvent yourself, in that way.
Mhm.
So like the rules don't apply anymore.
Right.
So that makes perfect sense. And I've never came across a vampire religion. So now I'm like, oh, okay. Although religion is brought up in I Am Legend, which because he talks
Okay.
about the symbol of the cross, and
Right.
he asks a question like, and this is not going to spoil anything, but he's like asking a question like, would it work on a Jewish vampire or a Muslim vampire? The cross.
Right.
I'm like, oh, yeah, obviously, because we just take these Western myths that are just
Mhm.
obviously the sign of good is a cross, and like,
Right.
oh, okay, so he's positing these vampires in a much larger context in a way that's different from Asian vampires or Chinese vampires, which I'm not sure if you know
Correct.
anything about them at all. The hopping vampires. Do you know
Yes.
anything? Yes,
And
which are
like the
ridiculous
concept.
fun.
Oh yeah. I
Yeah.
mean, I love folklore. I actually taught in Japan for a year and like the middle of nowhere. And that's sort of like their idea of witches, their idea of ghosts and vampires is so connected to like animism and
Mhm.
culture and faith. And I
Yeah.
feel like, I don't know, I guess one of the reasons I sort of invented a religion for in Bloodborne is that I feel like horror is the only genre that takes faith seriously and takes these questions of faith and like wrestles with them as if they exist or as when they exist for the reader. And if you see other genres, they might touch on it. Um, but often it's not even part of the conversation. Or do you watch something like I haven't watched it yet, but Midnight Mass, that there
Oh,
is that like strong religious component.
You need to see it
And
like tonight. Sorry. You need to see this, Stephanie. Yeah, it is brilliant. I'm actually trying to get the priest, the guy who plays the priest. I'm trying to get him in my other podcast, Heavy Metal Horror.
that'd be
I just
incredible.
want to talk to him because his performance is like, it makes me want to go to church, Father. Like, I want you to be my priest, even though I don't believe any of that. I
To
will
get
go to
into
that
the
church
culture.
just to listen to him and talk with him. I want to get to know him. And I almost never do that with characters on TV shows. Like, there's a handful, but him,
Mhm.
I was like, oh, this is so good. I just believed him, and it didn't feel like a performance. But anyway, so sorry. Yes, Midnight Mass. The Strain is also a lot of fun. I'm not sure if you've seen that. It was on FX a few
No,
years
I
ago.
haven't seen it yet. Right
Yeah,
now, with everything serious going on in the world,
yeah.
I'm watching The Righteous Gemstones on
Oh, that's
HBO.
so good. That's so
So that's
funny.
about my like
Yeah.
ability to deal with heavy topics.
Yeah. Well, The Strain,
That's as
it's
far as I get.
relevant now, right? And it came, it's on Hulu if you get a chance to see that.
Okay.
That's a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun. So, okay. I just I just feel like if we were like in the same circles, we would be good drinking buddies, like,
Oh, for
and
sure.
watching horror, like, yes, we would be in the same horror circles. Um,
And it
so
was funny, like a segue from movies into what I was writing is, have you ever seen, it's from 95, the Christopher Walken movie, The Addiction? It's
that sounds
so
so
interesting.
familiar. I think so. Boy, because there were a
It
lot of those movies in the
reimagines.
90s that were
Mhm.
talking about the vampirism and how was it? That sounds so familiar. I'm not sure if because there's a one with Nicolas Cage where he thinks he's a vampire,
Uh-huh.
and that addiction, that sounds so familiar. I'm not sure if I've seen it though.
The It was so indelible to me when I watched it in the 90s that when I thought of writing a vampire novel, which took me by surprise, I didn't intend to write one. And I was like, I love The Addiction because it reimagined vampirism as like a drug addiction.
Okay.
And I was like, how original. Like to think of it in not only a symbolic way, but to bring something fresh to the genre.
Yeah.
So I that was in my mind when I was writing Bloodborne. And I was like, I want something that's that out of the ordinary.
Okay.
That's like dismisses a lot of the tropes, which I love.
Sure.
But
But it's
to
nice to see
kind
a
of
fresh spin on it though.
it's fun, and I think that the Christopher Walken movie is what gave me the idea to do something different.
Yeah. I mean, he's just engaging to watch no matter what he's doing,
Right, right.
Right. Oh,
You
that's
can't go
awesome.
wrong.
No, no. So you said you didn't start off by wanting to write a vampire novel. So, but what made you want to write in the first place? What drew you in to wanting to write and wanting to write within this horror genre?
Um, so I've always loved spooky things. And we were talking creature features and loved Halloween and everything. And I started out writing pretty young, but it was mostly journals and poetry. And then I wasn't terribly serious about it. But then when I went to college, my primary major was history. And then I kind of added on creative writing. And it
Nice.
was all poetry. Like I had some fiction training.
Yeah.
Um, but then I sort of abandoned it and I went into teaching and I focused on all different kinds of other things. And then in June 2020, um, I remember June 2020. We were all a mess. I feel like it's like Sophia and Golden Girls, like Sicily 1920. We all kind of remember this.
Yeah.
And I didn't get COVID, but I ended up getting Lyme disease.
Oh,
And I had like a 104 fever. I had the bullseye rash, the whole 9 yards.
wow.
And
Made you
yeah,
want
it
to
was
write a story
wild.
about these ravenous deer? I mean, I can see that, you know.
Right. All these little like field mice and
Were deer,
whatever.
yes. Nice.
And I got so sick that everything that I had sort of based my life around just disappeared. Like I used to work out 6 days a week and my joint pain was so bad I couldn't do anything. Um, all my hobbies and everything were really active. And so kind of all I had left was my imagination. And I think I'd started having dreams and thinking about characters right around then. And then fall 2020, I started writing my first novel, which is not genre at all. Um, and it just came out. It was 2 months, and I wrote a novel, like start to
Wow.
finish.
Good for you.
And it was so funny. So that's kind of how I came back to writing. And it was so funny because at the end of that novel, one of the characters is alone, which is kind of a surprise in the whole novel. And so I was thinking of like a backdoor pilot. Like I was thinking of who this character would end up with. And I came up with this Mina character who wasn't a vampire at all, and her 5 brothers. And I love these characters, but I didn't have a story for them. And then I was in a doctor's office and I was flipping through a magazine, and it had a review of the original Dracula. And it was like a lightning bolt. I was like,
Yeah.
oh, okay, vampires, Mina, her brother, like, uh, and so I somewhat reluctantly fell into writing about vampires, and then realized like my imagination exploded. And now I have books in the works about ghosts and witches and all that kind of cool supernatural stuff.
Yes, wonderful.
And I don't know if I was just like lying to myself that this was one of my favorite genres, but it was like one step after another that sort of led to this whole thing where I'm like, oh my gosh, I love horror and I love the genre. And I would say my book is far more gothic, and how much I love like gothic lit and
Sure.
like that era.
Yeah.
So
Did you
that
ever
long
watch
story
Dark
short,
Shadows? Did you ever watch Dark Shadows?
yes, I did a lot of it.
Yeah.
And then I actually liked the movie, the one with Johnny Depp.
Yeah, it had some good moments. That's for sure. I mean,
Right.
it I knew they were doing the camp thing, but
Hmm.
I was like the first serial I remember watching as a kid. My mom loved it, and I just like I knew it wasn't a regular soap opera. All I cared was that there was a vampire and there were witches and werewolves. I'm like, I don't care what else is going on. I just want to see the
Right.
monsters.
Sold.
Yeah, I was like 4 years old watching. 5 years old and watching it. So no, I get it. It's funny when you were talking about your education. I have a BFA in creative writing. My thesis was poetry with a few
Oh,
short
wow. Great.
stories, and one of my minors was history. So it's
I
like
feel like the
the opposite.
two so frequently go together. Like, if
Yeah.
you can, it's like with history, you understand the world. And I think with English, you can communicate about it,
Oh,
about your knowledge and
yeah.
about what you're learning. So I feel like maybe it should always come as a double major.
Yeah. Well,
Like, they're so well tied together.
I adore that. That's a great idea, and it makes perfect sense. I could not decide on a singular minor because I was just when I was in college, I went to Bowling Green for my undergrad,
Oh,
and
no kidding.
yeah, and because they had a really good creative writing program,
Hmm.
and after after you 12 hours, from 13 hours to 18 hours, it's the same price of credit hours. So I
Okay.
took 18
Hmm.
credit hours every semester because I'm thinking, why not? I mean, why
Right,
go by
right.
through the minimum? I want to absorb it all. So I graduated. I had to do a planned program minor, which was history, literature, and music. Because I
Hmm.
couldn't do it all in one. I couldn't just focus on that. But I graduated with like 144 credits, and I needed like 120.
You know,
Yeah,
I
because I'm
think
like,
I did
why not?
too.
Why not? Take
Yeah.
advantage of this, you know?
Hmm.
And that's really, really funny. Where did you go to school?
I went to Case Western Reserve,
Oh, okay. That's a good
which you would
school.
be familiar with. That, like, I
Yes.
used to go to Bowling Green. I think I traveled out there a couple times for parties, because Case parties weren't super well known.
Yeah, right. Did you ever go to Miles Pizza Pub?
No, I don't think
Oh,
so.
okay. You missed it.
Do you miss it that much?
Oh, yeah, the phone number was 419-352-1504. Yes,
I love it.
well, the owner, Chip, moved away from Bowling Green, and the people who took the building over and started their own pizza place, it's just a shadow of what it was. I mean, Miles, but then he opened up a new Miles place down in Greenville, South Carolina. So you can call and get pizzas delivered from Greenville. Um, yeah, it's like the pizzas, the garlic bread with cheese. You want to be sitting down when you eat it because your knees would buckle. I mean, it's like that good. It's like you're so
I
grateful to have
love
a
it.
tongue. And then the pizzas weighed about 8.5 pounds, like a 15-inch pizza.
Awesome.
It was like a newborn baby. Much tastier though. Yeah. So
I'm now in Philly, and I've really gotten used to New York style pizza,
Okay.
and I'm
You
like
fold it. You
completely
gotta,
sold.
yeah, it's wide. You gotta
Yeah, it's
fold it.
great.
Yeah, sure. No, I
And
get it.
Philly has a super cool spooky scene. Like you wouldn't imagine it, but I guess like when you think about it for more than a few minutes, it makes sense. Because there's all these ghost tours of like the yellow fever or plague epidemic in Philly. There's the founding fathers, like all that kind of stuff, all
Yeah.
this lore. And then I just went in October to a Dracula's ball in Philly, which is
Nice.
so fun.
Did you get all
And
dressed
there's
up?
all
I mean, you
I
had to,
did.
right? Nice.
I did a little bit, and I dressed sort of as someone in The Only Lovers Left Alive. Have you
Yeah,
seen that,
that's a
Herbert?
good, so good.
It's so good. And I
So
had like the
good.
little gloves, and I like the
Yeah.
whole thing, and I had fangs.
You
Super fun.
tell me you watch What We Do in the Shadows.
I can't even describe how much I love that movie. I haven't seen. There's a show, right,
Yes.
on like
Yes. Oh,
FX or something.
yeah, you've not seen the show?
No, I've only seen the movie.
Oh, oh, Stephanie. Oh my. If you like the movie, you are
Uh-huh.
going to love the TV show because it brings more and different vampires in. Oh, Jesus
Awesome.
Christ, is it funny? Yes, it's like one of my favorite shows of all time, and you could watch it. You could stream it. Buy Hulu for a month just to get these things out of the
Just to get
way.
all this.
Just buy for a month, stream these shows, and say, okay, I'm done. It's
And
totally
I
worth it.
love these. I think visual depiction has been more influential in how I write than probably reading other authors.
Sure. So you're a
Like
visual
I
writer.
just, yeah,
Well,
and
you see
I'm
movies in your head, right? Like when you're depicting things,
precisely.
and you were trying to put words to what it is that you see.
I feel like I'm taking like dictation more than
Yeah.
I'm writing.
Right.
And
I
you
get it.
have these characters in your head, and I try to do it, yeah, more cinematically.
Mhm,
Um, and then after I write like the first draft, which is like almost all dialogue, I wouldn't say it's like a script, but
mhm.
it's pretty bare bones. And then I go in and add the atmosphere and the gothicism
Mm,
and like my narrative voice.
okay.
And so it starts as like as close to a script as a novel can be. And then I get to have fun with like the language, bring in my
Yeah.
poetry, like that kind of thing.
No, I like that. That's one of the questions I was going to ask is about your
Oh,
creative
okay.
process. No, no, it's fine. This whole thing, it doesn't have to be follow a script. I'm just like checking things off
Right.
as we talk about them because, we're just having a conversation. Wherever that conversation goes, I'm happy to go with it.
Perfect.
No, I love that. I've never actually. That's the first time I've ever heard someone do that. The drafting and then going back to revise. But like you, I'm a visual writer and I see things,
Hmm.
and
Oh, cool.
sometimes
Hmm.
it's just trying to put into words what it is because I grew up watching movies. I love movies. I was a voracious reader though too. I could read before I went to kindergarten, and because my parents read to me and then from the womb.
That's
So
incredible.
I'm like, I'm going into kindergarten and like wondering why are we learning the ABCs? Why aren't these kids
Right.
reading? I mean, like, are
Who
they
are these knuckleheads in my class?
exactly right? I'm like, does not anyone else know how to read? And the kid's like, what? So my kindergarten teacher, Miss Susie, hi Miss Susie, love you. She was just like, just astonished. I'm like, for me it wasn't a big deal, but now I look back, I'm like, oh yeah. But that just began
This
my
should
lifelong love affair with books and reading.
this should explain everything, but my kindergarten teacher was Sister Seraphim. So of
Hold on.
so the gothic is
I'm just absorbing that. Like, tell me they made a character name of her. That's like,
oh, that's a good
yes,
idea.
oh my
And she
God,
was
yes.
ancient. She was like,
Yes, she'd
I
have to
feel
be.
like
And
with
she's an old vampire. Like, my God, she's like dust. If you cut her, just dust will pour out. I mean, she's like 6,000 years old. She's got to be Egyptian or
Sister
something.
Seraphim, right?
Yes,
It's the best name.
she's got to be one of like an Egyptian queen or something. She's got to have an ankh somewhere on her, man. She's
So
got to
I
be a
was just
mummy.
like steeped in that from the
Oh,
time I was like born and that kind
I
of I went to two different convent schools that were in convents.
no,
So it's like you can't escape the
no.
crucifix and the like
Yes,
the stories of the saints and
all
all
the
those kind of things that are
suffering
just
and oh,
gruesome. Yeah.
Oh my God. I'm kind of envious. I mean, I grew up in a, Pentecostal background. So we had all the guilt and all those things, but we just didn't have all the, all the,
Smells and bells.
yeah, yes. No statues and no little trinkets, kind of
Hmm.
things, to rub on for our faith. And that's why I still get creeped out every time I would go into a Catholic church. Those statues, I am waiting for them to kind of like, look
Yes.
at me, or like wink, like, I know where you are, bastard. I'm like, that stuff terrifies me. And like the response, like the priest will say something and then the congregation says it back. I'm like, ugh.
And we all
It is,
memorize it.
yes, it is so creepy. It reminds me of Beneath the Planet of the Apes, which you might not have seen.
Oh my gosh, all the Planet of the Apes, I love. I love them
Okay,
all.
now you get it. We
Yes.
worship the bomb. It's like, oh my God, this is like the Catholic Church. They're all, we worship the bomb. Let us reveal
Right, right.
ourselves, and
It's
oh,
funny that you mention, like, I know you had written a book on faith deconstruction, and that I sort of had a deconstruction from Catholicism, and now I belong to this like weird sort of offshoot of it. Um, it's a tiny faith. I think there's 40 people who belong to it in like the US. And it so inspired the scripture and the religion that I wrote about. And this idea of being a subculture,
yeah,
and any religious subculture like Hasidic Judaism and being Amish, and I kind of brought in a lot of these subcultures, um, but having a faith that's almost impossible to describe and having it being so pervasive, like a lifestyle faith,
sure.
uh, really influenced Mina's story. And I'm not just dealing with faith topics, but like her individual faith journey. And she's
Yeah,
almost deconstructing her religion,
sure.
which is weird because I totally made it up. Like,
Right. No, no, that's awesome. When you talked about bringing the Amish in, I was momentarily distracted by thinking of Amish vampires and how that would work. Like, of course, they don't want you to take their picture because they don't like the idea of, it's like
right.
stealing their soul. No, and of course, they're not going to show up on film. And then the idea of like, how are they going to churn butter? They don't want to be messing with those like wooden stakes like that, those big pieces of wood. You know,
Traumatizing.
I know. I'm like, how does an Amish vampire work? Like, oh, I get something to something to think about. So
We're getting so many good ideas now.
I
Sister
know, I
Seraphim
know.
and the
This is
Amish
like,
vampire.
yes, this is just like the best Monday morning ever. So
Yeah, for me too. This is really fun.
yes. What makes a good horror story to you? To try to bring it back around to your
Oh,
writing.
sure, of course. Uh, I think, I mean, it's got to have gore. I love gore.
Okay.
And I think it has to have like that otherness and the isolation. And I feel like I'm interested in horror that deals with the horror in our minds and the horror that we live in. Like
Okay.
I feel like the world we live in is very lurid and violent and the dark side of the world we live in. Um, and I feel like horror that I connect with deals with that seriously
Yeah.
and in a symbolic way. And I think that's why I'm more drawn to gothic horror than like what's more popular these days. Like I can't watch like or read serial killer stuff or anything that could possibly really happen. Um, but the gothic, I feel like humanizing a monster and I don't know, all of those themes I love, and I love the symbolic. I feel like it's one of my favorite, not a trope, but facets of fiction. Is
Sure.
someone who's really into the symbolic and what they write.
So, have you seen Midsommar?
No, I think I'm kind of
Okay.
afraid to watch it.
Okay, because I mean, talk about symbolism. It's all
Right,
rampant through that movie. But
right.
that's what I was thinking. Like, oh yeah, okay, I can see that. There's also a movie called The Ritual that you might enjoy.
Have not seen it yet,
Yeah, those are
but
on
I
Netflix,
think
and it
awesome. I
involves
think,
that as well, in a lesser degree.
and I love this like modern take on everything of those themes. And I feel like The Witch does that so well. It is one of my
Yes.
favorite movies.
Oh, it's so
And it's
creepy, and It's so
It's
like
so
it
good.
kind of builds its own momentum, and I like that. I mean,
Hmm.
I grew up watching movies from the '70s, so I don't mind the journey, because this one
I
pays
like when
off.
people take their time. Hmm.
Yes, right, exactly. It's not going to be like 3 minutes in, like in Scream. Although Scream's a very fun movie, just a different kind.
Super fun.
Yeah, my grandma and she loved that movie.
That's so
Yeah,
cool.
yeah, we watched. I couldn't find anything too scary for her. She loved The Evil Dead. She loved The Descent. She said, "I
Awesome.
told them girls not to go in that cave." Uh, and she loved
Hilarious.
Child's Play. She'd say things like, "Well, that Chucky, he's got real pretty eyes, but he gets awful mean." I'm like, yeah, yeah, Grandma,
I love
he
that.
he gets awful mean. Is yes, I just adored her. She was my girl. So that's good. Well, how do you know when you've written something horrific? Like, what is your litmus test for your fiction? I mean, you got the gore, you got these things. Like, is that what you hold yourself accountable to? Like, when you write something like, okay, this creeps me out. I think it's going to creep out a reader as well.
Well, I had someone tell me recently that they don't often read books that feel sinister. And I feel like A, that was an incredible compliment. And B, I feel like I love that like foreboding feeling. And the sinister and gothic literature is so important. And that's when I like what I write. And I want that sort of almost like psychological foreboding is such a good word for it.
Yeah,
And
dread,
unsettling.
dread. Yeah.
Yes. And I feel like when I look back, when I start, I heard someone say that in horror, the setting is its own character. And I feel like when I get the setting right,
Hmm.
then it has that creepy factor. And then it has
Yes.
that eerie kind of feeling that
Hmm.
I'm going for and hope to go for.
Yeah. Well, that's part of the Gothic tradition. Like
Hmm.
the castle or the grounds you are a setting every bit as much as other genres, like a cozy mystery. You want the cute little
Right.
town, and
Hmm.
and the setting becomes, or the town becomes a character,
Hmm.
in that storytelling. So that's interesting you mentioned it, because my next question on my list is talking about world building, and how
I'm
do
reading your
you
mind.
there we go. How did you design your world? Like, how do you go about designing this world that you want your characters to live in, this wonderfully named Mina Coffin
I
and
want to
other
like
characters?
legally change my name to that and just pretend it's a autobiography.
Yes, I mean, come on. It's like, yeah, and yeah, I get it, man. I get it. Well,
In terms of world building, I kind of let, well, I guess with my book, because it's modern day, I wanted to imagine the modern as Gothic. So in the first quarter of the book, Mina's on tour with her brother Eb's band. Um, and I was thinking how spooky, I've seen a lot of live music. And I was thinking how eerie and unsettling it is to be in a venue after hours and to be in a back parking lot, like where it's a flickering light, almost kind of noir.
yeah,
But instead of a castle, like there's one point later on where Mina is like in a doctor's office, she's in a facility for a little while, like a couple days. And that can feel really creepy and foreboding and whatever, depending on like the reason you're there. And so all these little touchstones and all these little bits and pieces. I have one scene, a couple of scenes where she's in a playground at night. And that just feels so like Chernobyl and like you have
let the
this
right one
innocence.
in.
Yes,
Yes.
exactly. I
Yes.
love
I
that.
think that was when you said
Um,
that. I'm like, oh, I see the scene from Let the Right One In. They're on sitting on top of the monkey bars, and it's snowing.
uh-huh.
I'm like, yep, exactly. I get it. You get that cold light coming in. Yes. Yeah.
It's so good. So I would say my writing is so character driven, and the characters are relatively normal. Like there's other than Lucy, who's following Mina throughout the story, they're not terribly sinister or gothic. I mean, they have these wonderful gothic names, um, but it's the setting that I think tells the story, and then creating this super isolated, super weird religion.
Hmm.
There's one scene where there's like a service and there's like old skulls on a platform and the teeth of blood mad. So I have the bloodborne and the blood mad. The blood mad have fangs, and ones that they tore out like in the plague days in the 1300s.
Nice.
And all those touchstones and all those bits and pieces and the production design of what I'm writing, I feel like adds to this maybe urban fantasy. So you have the normal, but then all these like creepy bits are in it.
Yeah. Well, you're grounding it by having this religion and having the formula, the tropes, the icons, the rituals. You're making it a very realistic setting, even though it's the fantastic with the capital F, you know, and it's a world that it's very seductive. Like, you know, who doesn't want to be a vampire? Like, you know, that's why in Bram Stoker's Dracula, you know, here's John Wick, you know, complaining. Keanu Reeves, John Wick, same thing, complaining, like, oh, these vampire women are keeping me up all night. I'm like, and that's a problem? Like, dude, what's the problem?
Jonathan,
right,
they're vampire girls.
Yeah, it's like, hello.
Right. And then Dracula's obsession with Mina, like,
yeah,
it's not a bad problem to have. Like,
no, there are way worse problems. You could be like,
right.
You know, Harker. You could be like, you know, eating flies.
Right.
Yeah, like, no, you're getting the 3 vampire chicks. Yeah, just enjoy it. So,
and it's funny because I think the more unique and fresher aspects of what I'm writing is my vampires are not immortal. They can die from like a car accident or a disease or any normal thing. And it made this vampire idea so much more immediate, because if you're dealing with like 70, 80 years of a life, hopefully, then the need to drink blood is like so much more important, because you want to keep the life that you have. And the need to wrestle with these like ethical and symbolic issues in your life. It becomes more important, I think, when you don't have 500 years to deal with it.
Yeah,
it's a weird really vampire story.
No, I like that. It's very interesting. Because I was just thinking, like, the whole idea of this vampire religion, it just is thrilling, and I'm so excited to read it, because I'm just imagining the whole. I hope I haven't like blown anything, but this concept of communion, it would be so different to vampires. Like, this is my blood. Like, when you're converting, I am shedding for you, drink of my body. You know, you could bring all those Christian tropes in, but in such an easy way, such an easy transition to all this other symbolism of blood and life. And so, no, that's fascinating. And
then I have in the prologue, there aren't a lot of spoilers, because in the prologue I say right away that Mina turns, and I say right away like that they need blood to survive. So yeah, I try and that was one way. It was a friend's suggestion, one of my beta readers, because I was doing a few info dumps along the way, because it's such a new world. And she's like, why not have a prologue? She's like, they're not the most popular thing, but the way that your world works, she's like, it would be great. It could explain a lot and do it in a style that's like fitting and engaging. It was the best suggestion. And so I can add that sense of foreboding, because you kind of know what's going to happen, and then you get to see it unfold for yourself.
Right. That's a kind of tension that what's his face? Psycho, the Birds, Alfred Hitchcock would employ when the audience knows something bad is coming, and then just prolongs that, like, knowing something's going to happen, and just makes them crazy, you know? No, I like
and
that.
Hitchcock was like, for another book, I was researching like suspense, because there's a moment when everything is revealed. And I looked up online how to avoid a Scooby-Doo ending. And someone said to study Hitchcock, because the way he has pacing, the way he does suspense. And so I love Hitchcock. And I feel like, I'm glad you brought that up, because it was something in this translating the cinematic into a book that, I absolutely love. He does exactly that.
Yeah. And I like that he knew what he was doing. This is intentional.
Super
I'm gonna be
intentional.
like fucking with you here. I'm gonna be really just
I know
prolonging.
you, and I'm gonna mess it
Yeah,
up.
exactly. Right. And yes, and because there's so much eroticism surrounding vampires as well.
Absolutely,
It's almost a sense of extended like a foreplay. Like we are just gonna like just
for sure.
well, you know what's coming, but we're just gonna make you
Hmm.
wait for it. It's like so I like that being able to manipulate the audience expectations and wants and needs and to kind of dole it out at your pace, make them wait. That's
And my
awesome.
friend said that I had an ARC reader, and she's like, I love that you info drip instead of info dump, which I
Oh,
love
nice.
because
Yes.
it's dripping blood of like, it's so awesome.
That's beautiful. What a great way to do it. Yes, it's like one of the reasons why I love reading Frank Herbert. I'm not sure if you've ever read Dune.
Yes, Dune is
Yes.
one of the best books I've ever read in my life.
Yes, the whole series.
Yes.
Uh yeah, Dune was my favorite book until I read God Emperor of Dune. I'm like, oh, I didn't think anything could surpass this, but oh my God, this is just like book four. It's like, I found myself like reading one page like and luxuriating, like I don't want this to end. This is so
That's
perfect.
awesome. I love this
Yeah,
book.
yeah. And that's what
And
he
he
does too.
does.
Just a little bit. And just he's not going to have to necessarily explain things. Like you'll catch up because you're
Mhm.
immersed in this world and you'll get it or you won't. And he's okay with just letting you sink or swim, you
And I
know?
loved in Dune that I think it's the first line is fear is the mind killer.
Well,
And he
that's the
has it.
litany. It's not the first line of the book, but it is one of the litany against fear. Certainly the Bene
Mhm.
Gesserit. Yes.
And I love that it's so like liturgical,
Yes.
and it's like this repeated like
Mhm.
refrain throughout the book, fear is the mind
Mhm.
killer.
Mhm.
And the first lines of my book are the world is ghastly, it is the clouded alone.
Yes.
And that kind of comes up, and
Okay.
I use those words and I
Nice.
use that throughout the book. And these are all my heroes. Like I'm not putting
Yes.
myself in the same categories like Hitchcock or Frank
No,
Herbert or
I know,
whatever, but
but
they're
they're
people I admire.
yes, and they're all writing is in some way, shape, or form is an homage. It's inspiration,
Hmm.
inspired by. I mean, these are not new stories. I mean, we have stories that are, Greek stories from 5,000 years ago and Sumerian stories, Beowulf for crying out loud. There's the first like heroic story that we have
For
and,
sure.
written record. So, I mean, everything's been inspired from Beowulf. No, but it's wonderful to be in a position where you can say, this has inspired me and you want to do something that's not you're not trying to rip them off or imitate them or
Hmm.
but it inspired you. There's an homage, there's a love for this that you want to contribute to this overall body of work in some way, shape, or form. And which that's what I did with my last book, Death's Head, and it's my homage to Lee Falk's The Phantom, the pulp hero from the 40s,
Hmm.
30s and 40s. And I used to read The Phantom daily as a kid in the newspapers and just grew up watching, loving The Phantom. So that was my homage. I don't try to rip off The Phantom, but it certainly inspired me to create a Phantom-like character.
Hmm.
So I totally get that. Um, of which of your characters would you most like to have a drink with?
Uh, so Mina's she's got five brothers. Two of them are twins, and their names are Abraham and Harker. So it's Hark and Bram, because all of these coughing kids have
Yeah,
gothic names.
Harker. There you go. Nice.
It's crazy. I met a kid whose name was Harker, and like a little one, and I immediately talked to his parents. I'm like, oh my gosh, you don't understand. And the guy loved Dracula. Uh,
Nice.
but I would say Hark and Bram are like the trickster characters, and
Okay.
they're always like putting people in a situation, giving them all kinds of substances, any kind of mind altering substances, and then sitting back and watching what happens. So I think having a drink with them would be so entertaining because they're always trying to like screw with people and have pranks. And I don't know, I feel like they would be the most fun to have a drink with.
Nice. Excellent. Organization.
Mhm.
I've met so many writers who are on either side of the pantser plotter thing. So are you a
Right.
pantser or a plotter or somewhere in between?
I have thought a lot about this, and I think I'm like a very intuitive writer where it's all plotted in my head, but I don't have like a written outline. I don't have character studies, but I have the vision of the whole thing. And I read once that like famous sculptors look at a piece of marble, they can see so clearly what's inside of it, and they're just chipping away to reveal it. And I feel like my writing and the words I have in the chapters are just chipping away at this whole vision I have of what I'm writing. And so it's like not quite either. I jump in with a scene. Like I can just so clearly see a scene. And I also feel like I'm flexible with what happens, even though I have like an overarching idea of where I want it to go.
Mhm.
And I love like the chaos and the inspiration and the randomness as I'm writing of like discovering things. Like there's this very important character, Gregor. He shows up at like page 150 or something. And he becomes a major character, even though I didn't intend him to be there.
Mhm.
And there's like this one scene where they're at a liturgy service for their faith. And he appears in it and like hangs out afterward. And then I was like, he needs to be a big character.
Mhm.
Like this isn't just Mina and Marston and like all these other characters. And that surprise was so exciting. So
Yeah.
I think I'm very flexible, but I
Mhm.
also have like this big idea in my head.
Yeah. Well, I found I'm a plotter. This probably comes from
Okay.
being an academic and having to have that organized world and creating those
Mm-hmm.
cogent paragraphs and coherent papers, and that's how I taught my students. And so now, like my current work, it's the second of my cozy mystery series. My outline's like 23 pages or something like that,
Oh
26
my
pages.
gosh.
And it's color coded. I know.
I
Um,
love it.
my pulps were like 6, 8 page outlines because they're much smaller,
Right.
but even though I had 23 pages of outline in a 400-page book, that's you still have so much in between. Like you still have to get from
Mm-hmm.
point A to point B. So there are those moments, even though there's intention where I've had and planning, there's also a lot of invention on the way and discovery
Yes.
and imagination. They all kind of combined because I had a character like you or a few characters who kind of took more prominence. Like I at the end of the first book, like I like this character. I knew like the last character I created was this kind of a gadfly. He's a I forget the actor's name. He was a huge character actor from the 19 like 40s and 50s. I just love him, and
Mm-hmm.
he's got this kind of really brash kind of way of he's had this kind of half chewed half smoked cigar in his mouth and
I love
a
it. I love it.
raspy horse, and I want this guy to be like he's the local newspaper writer, and he's always wearing like a yellow shirt with always got stains, and people can tell like what day of the week it is because the stains are on different places. Like this is his Wednesday
Yes.
shirt, and he's just like this really crass kind of guy who's always like sticking his nose and like goading people because he wants a headline. And I thought, okay, it's a cozy mystery, but there's a small town and people are going to be, some nice and some not. But I just love this guy. I'm like, oh, I
Mm-hmm.
need to see way more of him. So I made him like really good friends with the dentist, and whose wife is one of these like very snooty, like, you know who I am kind of thing. I'm like, this is going to drive her crazy. I'm like, yes, because they're going to like cigar. And she's like, oh God, he's coming over again. Like, I just
Right.
knew who this guy was. And when I started writing him, I'm like, oh yeah, this is the good stuff. And so now it's like in the second book, like he still hasn't taken a prominent role in this one, but I love writing the character because he's just him and you're like, yeah, okay, he's going to be an instigator. Like
And
maybe
I
in the
love
next
that.
book he'll be more
Uh-huh.
prominent. Yes.
I love that about the character Lucy that I wrote because she steals every scene she's in. And she's not in a ton of scenes, but she's always this like stalking creature type thing, but she's also incredibly alluring. So she's the most vampy of all the characters. And writing her was such a joy because she's so like rotten. Like she's such a villainy villain. And there's like the way that she sort of interacts with Mina and also torments her is so fun to write. And I'm sure you feel that way about this,
Yeah, he's
the character that you wrote.
Yeah, he's really fun, and as well as the other one, Jillian Rosado Lancaster. You have to use all three names.
Love it.
Yeah, she's very much the very snooty, fadingly pretty, self-important kind of person who's overdressed and making sure her hair, her voluminous, long black curls, fall a cascade
Awesome.
across her shoulders. She's driving the Escalade in the middle of this like little tiny town. Um, yes, when characters come up, and they're fun to write, you want more of them. And like the villain in my last book, the pulp, the Death's Head, I kind of knew who he was, and he doesn't show up until very late in the book. But once,
Mhm.
like the first line that came out of his mouth, I'm like, oh yeah, I know this. I know this character. And it was like
Yes.
so much fun to write. I'm like, I can't kill him off. This guy's got to be around for at least 3 or 4 books because he's just too delicious, like,
Hmm.
and as a writer, like you don't always get those moments because sometimes there's a lot of like tedium in the act of writing. It's like,
Yes.
I got to write 2,000 words, like, and
I
sometimes
got to
it's like that.
transition these two scenes. Yeah.
Right, exactly. Or like, but getting to that point, because that was a book I wrote in 30 days. I wanted to do a book in a month, and
That's awesome.
oh, thank you. It's a short book. It's like 110 pages, but still for me, it's like the idea of doing it. And I felt like almost nothing. There was like one day where I felt like, okay, I'm doing good work today. I felt like it was just weird. In my other books, I've kind of felt something. I felt connected to them.
Hmm.
But once I got to him, I'm like, oh, okay. Finally, I'm getting something in return. I'm getting some enjoyment out of writing this fantastic character, and it's an unexpected character. I'll send you all my books if
Oh,
you don't
yeah,
have to read anything. Well, I think I already did, actually.
you did. And
Yes.
I
Okay.
skimmed the first couple of pages of each one.
Oh, okay.
And I love that you do splatter westerns. I think
Oh,
that's
thank
so
you.
cool. I've only ever really read one western,
Okay.
and I feel like it's such an underappreciated genre. And
Yeah.
it's cool. It's like I
Oh,
loved watching Westworld because it
yeah.
had all those like motifs,
Yeah.
and even though
And
it was so modern.
right, Deadwood is another dark western. This
Hmm.
is a western in the context where it's less westerny tropes and more a story of revenge set in the time and
I
of the
love revenge
West.
stories.
Yes, it's perfect. I mean, that whole Christendom is built on the idea of hell and God's
Hmm.
revenge on Satan, right? Like forever. I'm gonna burn you
Right.
all. I mean, like, he's just waiting around for that revenge to kick in. Um, yeah, exactly. There's nothing more pure, I think, as a motivator than revenge. And growing up in a life where you're taught, God's gonna get revenge for you. I'm like, no, he's and coming to that realization, like, no, I need to get revenge for myself. I got a purge list. And one day I'm gonna get you
Yes.
motherfuckers, like, please,
I was
President
reading
Biden. Yeah.
something.
Oh, good. Yeah.
I was reading something where instead of acknowledgments at the end of the book, you should have like who ruined the book for you. Like
Oh,
it's
that's funny.
and to my sister-in-law who
Mm,
like made me so miserable when I was
that's
so it'd
awesome.
be
I
like
love
a
that.
list of grievances.
It's like it's Festivus.
Yes.
Yes,
Yes.
we're gonna
Airing of
air the grievances.
grievances.
I'm just gonna write my purge list. Like if the purge
Yes.
happens, you guys are on it. So that's funny. I'll probably get arrested for that, kind of thing. Oh, someone's threatening my life.
Right.
No, well, thank you for reading those. Yeah, the cozy takes a little bit. That was my first book, and I'm just like floundering around. But it's a visual writer, and I thought it's a gentle story, but you get backstory. And once about page 100 is like when the thing like really starts kicking into gear. But Gage is Black is so much more immediate and intense. There's an intensity through those 127 pages or 28. It just maintains. And that was really fun to write because I mean, it's all full of hate and it's visceral and it's
Love it.
lurid and violent and just descriptive. Like all my poetry that I learned, all the vivid use of language and the condensation of imagery I put into this book. And that's what Gage to me is like the first time I felt free, utterly free as a writer. Like
Hmm.
I was like, after I was done, I'm like, I was breathing differently. Like, I just, I gave birth to this. This is me. This is finally me on the page, and it gets harsh. I mean, there are scenes where I knew I was writing. I'm like, Gage, oh my God, you are one cold. And I'm like, but I was taking great joy in writing it because I could hear him.
Right.
say it. And I was like,
I love that.
yeah. So there's a scene about page 117 to 126 or something like that. When you get to that point,
Okay.
you'll let me know. So um, that that was terrific fun to write because it is so bleak and dark. But anywho,
Awesome.
after my next cozy, when I finish this, that sequel, the next book in the Gage Black trilogy comes out. So that one's called Cardinal Sins, and it takes a character what we're going to meet in the first book, Cardinal Solemn, and it's going to be more about him. So
And I do the same thing. Like I have so many books on my docket of like I want to write, and I work on multiple pieces at the same time.
mhm,
And so right now I'm about 80% drafted of the sequel to Bloodborne. And I have like maybe 4 or 5 books that I plan on writing in the universe, but not this set of characters. And it's great because I have a daily writing habit. I've
oh, nice.
written pretty much, my rule was at least a paragraph every day.
Oh,
And that's been since October 2020.
mhm.
And so I like bypassed writer's block by just having so many projects.
Yes.
Like if I'm bored with one, I can just
Yeah,
hop into another one.
I love that. That's a really interesting way of looking at it because I I get ideas for multiple works in progress, and it's
Mhm.
pretty much stopped now because I got like 6 on the in the back. It's like there's like no point in giving me fresh ideas until you get some of these off your plate.
Right,
But
for
but
sure.
I about 75% of the way through a draft, the next book will start talking to me like, "Hey,
Hmm.
I'm here. You finish this because I need to come out." And I'll find myself because at the that last quarter of the book, I'm like, I'm done with the story. I've told it in my mind 1,000 times. I just want to get it out, you know. But
And do you type page one to the last page
I
or
do,
like
I do. Yeah,
I'm amazed by that. I
I
think it's
write.
so fascinating.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I write chronologically. I mean, but see, before though, when I've done all my pre-writing and all my ideas, I have a notebook that I keep and I write things down. I might have written like passages or dialogue that will happen sometime in the book that I just don't know
Mhm.
when. And I'll have written those out ahead of time and I'll just put them in the outline. Um, but
Right.
once I start writing, I like to work from beginning to end because for me, knowing how knowing how it's going to end will allow me sometimes to put those breadcrumbs in early or kind of revisit themes that readers won't know about.
Right.
Like oh, like an M. Night Shyamalan movie, like, oh, the color red. Oh, he's dead,
Of course.
Yeah,
Yeah.
now I see it. And so that it enables me to foreshadow things. It also helps me build on the themes that I'm working on earlier in the book, and kind of it helps me keep and track and like, okay, what have I done? What have I? How's the character building, and then continue that as it goes. So yeah,
I
but
do
usually,
it. I think of my books like concept albums. So I write the songs in whatever order and the chapters in whatever order feels right
mhm.
and feels authentic to that part. And then I start putting them in the correct order for the album.
Oh,
And
okay.
I even all of
Oh,
my scenes I title in my head.
okay.
So it's easy to
Nice.
organize. And I
Yeah,
kind of see it as like either like a concept album or like a mixtape
yeah,
where I'm plugging all of these little pieces in to create a cohesive story. And I
sure.
jump all over the place. Like I could write what's funny is with Bloodborne, I jumped all over the place, but then towards the end, excuse me, I wrote the last part when I got to the end, and the last paragraph set up the sequel. I didn't even intend to write a sequel. It hadn't
Okay,
occurred to me. And I
nice.
wrote this and I was like, ah, shit, I got to have a sequel. This is more work for me.
Isn't that wonderful though? Like when
It's
the
cool.
unexpected happens, like,
Hmm.
oh, okay. You know, like right. Like the the cozies, it's 4 series, it's 4 books. That's it.
Hmm.
One for each season. I know it's going to be done.
Oh, I
But
love that.
but so I'm telling one complete like story over 4 books. And but I already know something, and I mentioned this on other shows. So people listeners will be like, I've heard this, Mark. What I want to do is something I've never seen in any other genre. I'm going to be taking this cozy mystery town and all the characters, and I'm going to be doing a horror story in the town with all the same
How
characters.
interesting. I
And
think that's so cool.
Yeah, I think it'll be really exciting to do, because this is the main reason why I'm adding so many characters in books 2, 3, and 4, is that so I have
Mhm.
more people to kill off, and then the horror story,
It's the
because
best.
I'm killing everybody, like every fucking person in the town is gone. It's like Roanoke in there, like what
Yes,
happened?
yes.
But the story I have, and this came to me when I was at a book show. I'm selling my books. I'm like, oh my God, I gotta do a horror story. I've gotta.
I love
Oh.
it.
And then when it came to me, like what the horror was and how it was gonna be working, like the challenge of doing it as a writer, because like, oh, this is really big. Like, okay. And I can't tell it from the main character, like Abby. I'm not going to tell it from her point of view. It's going to be from her friend Ray Acavito, because he's a police officer. I got to tell it from his point of view. And
And you do third person past tense,
I do,
correct? If I remember.
but
Same.
there's a lot of transitioning between the omniscient narrator and then Abby's internal monologue, because she will
Mhm.
finish sentences often, and that just kind of happened naturally. Like I
I
know
love that.
there's a specific term for it, which I'd never come across it before. I thought, well, this just feels right, like for her to
Mhm.
finish the thought of someone narrating her life.
So cool.
Yeah, and that way, because so much time is spent in her head, because she's, in the first book, she's recovering, she's on the bottom level of the hierarchy of needs, she's worried about her job, she's depressed, and she's all these things. And so this book, second one, it's a spring book, and I always find spring to be a little gross. It's not the pretty spring, we're talking like right after the
It's like
winter
mud and
thaw.
muck.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly, broken sticks and everything's dead looking, like the trees are still like, I'm waking up. um and she's not at the bottom, she's going up in the hierarchy of needs, and this is the where it's about connection, it's about identity, it's about relationships to others, and it's a messy, murky, like liminal time, like it's just an ugly time. And so in her, the events that happened in the first book, it's like 3 months later, and now she's so much in her head, because
Mhm.
she's this is a parallel, this is the metaphor, she's just like, what the hell, and like questioning everything, and she's just too much in her head. So I kind of like that, using that vehicle of going back and forth between the narrator and her thoughts, to kind of break it up, because you have to push the story somehow.
Right.
um,
Mhm.
but I like that you spend so much time in her head, because that's the whole story is told through her experience in a way.
And I
um,
think in the sequel that I wrote, I added another point of view, still third person past tense. And I had to remove this entire character because I'm like, I want to keep it intimate, I want to keep it close, and I want the entire thing to be about Mina. Because like she's the driver of the story. And I'm probably my favorite writer is Thomas Hardy. And I love that like 19th century, very active narrator, where they're kind of, not only is their narrative voice huge and so different than the characters, but they also have commentary. Like it's as if it was someone like talking person to person and you're
mhm,
telling the story.
mhm.
And I think that's why I really, my first draft, I didn't have much of a narrative voice. And then I really beefed it up with each subsequent draft. And it's another homage, I think, to Thomas Hardy and
Sure.
like that era of writers.
Yeah, which you see that revisited, like in Catcher in the Rye. You
Yeah.
get that kind of sense, I'm holding Caulfield, and that narrative voice, that's how you get into the characters, you know their thoughts and lives, and that's how you connect,
Hmm.
in that regard. No, I love that. Do you do, or any, you had mentioned before that you do research for your books, so what kind of research do you do or have you done for your books?
I let the research come to me as I'm writing. So if there's a particular scene or something I don't know about and I don't know how to write it, like for example, I said that like the first quarter of the book, she's on tour with her brother's band. And my brother-in-law is a semi-professional musician, and my brother is too. So I was kind of asking them, like, the one character is a sound engineer and they bring him with the band. And I was like, is that realistic? Like, is that something that happens? And so I talked to both of them and then I like went on all these like random Reddit threads. So it's the research is spontaneous
Okay.
and the research sort of happens as I go along.
Sure.
Um, and then I do a lot of, because the characters quote Carmilla and the characters quote Dracula or whatever. I just do simple stuff like wiki quote or whatever it
Sure.
is.
Right.
And like scroll through and I'm like, oh, this one hits the nail on the head.
Yeah. You want to make sure you have the words right. If you're quoting Dracula, you better have it right.
Sure. And the one character quotes at the beginning, there's a character, Marston, and they start out the book by sharing their favorite books. They exchange books, Mina and Marston. And his favorite book is Cat's Cradle, the Vonnegut book.
Yes, I remember reading that fondly in undergrad.
I was obsessed with that book.
Here, this is a pussy, you know. Like,
right.
Okay.
And then speaking of invented religion, like this Bacchanalism, but I had to be like really careful to quote that properly.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Vonnegut's a whole other story. That's a whole other podcast on him.
Oh my gosh, for sure. Yeah, he's a trippy writer.
Yes.
But for other books like this prequel that I'm writing is set in like the 1350s-ish. So Plague Days in Romania. That I've had to do a lot of research of. I wanted to research grammar, like do they use it differently? I wanted to research clothing. Like I can't just say this girl's in a dress. Like
right.
I want to get it right. And the types of food they ate. And then I was researching, they're in a forest in a lot of it, the characters. I wanted to see what trees are native to the Carpathian Mountains.
Yes.
But like I said, it comes spontaneously. I'm like starting to write about forests, and I'm like, oh my gosh, I got to get this right.
You have to know it, right? Exactly, right. You're a planner as you go. It seems like you're planning as you go, which is an interesting process, you know, because you don't know what you're going to need until you need it, and so then you'll find it then. I like that.
And I'm very like, oh, sorry.
No, I was just going to say, the academic in me comes out. Like I knew Death's Head and Gage Black, because Gage Black takes place right after the Civil War. Death's Head takes place in like early 1930s near Haiti. That's when I was doing my research. Like I need to know what was going on in America right after the Civil War, like in Arizona, because that's where hell is. And I needed to know like the weapons and the kinds of guns that were used and the mail routes and what was, you know, all just little things like that, because it's the good is in the details, or as you know, the God is in the details. And the same thing with, I did probably more research for Death's Head because I'm writing about voodoo and like the Loa, you know, Samedi is one of the main characters. He's the god of the dead kind of thing. So I wanted to be respectful of the religion and of the personalities. Each of these Loa have different personalities and different abilities. And so I was doing research into the voodoo and the like the drums that are used in the ceremonies. So there's three different drums. They all have different intonations and so I'm listening to voodoo music like while I'm writing. I'm like, oh yeah, that's this drum, and like, you know, I can tell.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to get it right. And even though there's so much fantasy involved with like the zombies and things like that, but I still did research into that. But it was more about history of Haiti in the early 1930s, what had been going on, what was going on, what was real, because you have to ground it in something like what you're doing, like what kind of trees are over there? You're not going to say, oh, the orchard of apple trees. Like, no, they weren't there. You know, I mean, it's those little things like that show respect, I think, for what you're trying to do. And you want to ground it in a reality as much as possible so that those things don't get in the way, you know, like, you could be as fantastic. You want the story
to be the focus and not have to worry about,
Exactly. We're not like James Patterson here. We're not like, you know, we're not trying to, you know, write enough to where like the CIA is asking us, can you tell us more about this? You know, we're not doing that kind of stuff. But we just want to make sure it's grounded in reality. So it's respectful. It's genuine. You know, I like that.
And that's the thing with, I had to research less for Bloodborne because I invented my own religion.
Yeah.
I could just like pull it out of the air.
Yeah, and your memories and your experiences. I mean, the things that you have gone through. I mean, Sister Seraphim, like, oh, such a, oh my God, you better use that name, Stephanie.
Maybe like, I will. Maybe
you have to. You have to. You know, that's. If not, I will. I mean, because I've
Let's have a discussion before you use her, though.
Sure.
Like then I can sign off. I'll give you the imprimatur.
Okay, that's great. Yeah, because I've already invented it in my head. Well, because in the third. I'm not sure, and it might be the third book in Gage Black. I've got the titles already. The third one's called Gage Black and the Riders from Hell, and there this
Love it.
in Hell, Arizona. I wanted this kind of like a brothel nunnery, like the whole like get thee to a nunnery thing, where they were
Yeah.
these they were dressed like nuns, but they had this a Gatling machine gun, and they're called the Gatling nuns. I'm like, it's just so over
I
the
love
top,
it.
like Gatling nuns. Like,
Right.
yes, I've got to have this. And my wife's
That's
like,
so
oh,
cool.
I'm like, yeah, it's gonna work. It's gonna work. No, no,
I will
but
say one of the things that I did for notes is that where Mina is on this like tour, I had to write it out and I had to think of it logistically. Like if she's in one scene in LA, the next scene wouldn't be in Chicago. Like that's a long haul to like
sure,
be with her brother on tour. Um, so I take like micro notes. And so I had that like listed out. And then the whole book takes place in about a year. So I had to have the seasons mapped out so that every single time I
okay,
was referring to the seasons, I didn't have like, I don't know, talking about jack-o'-lanterns in March.
right, yeah. You have your calendar, like, okay, what month is this one? Yeah, no,
Right.
I love that. No, that's great. No, I love that. Can you tell me how you felt seeing your book in print for the first time?
So I've had some publishing issues with printers.
Uh-oh.
Um, so I didn't see a physical copy of my book until 3 or 4 days after the release of the book. So I
Really?
didn't have an author copy. Yeah, it was a mess
Oh, no.
with
Was this
supply
the
chain issues, and
Oh, okay. Did
it
you
was a
go
whole
oh, you
thing.
went through a publisher, not KDP, right? Is that what I'm talking or hearing? Or
So I went through Ingram Spark.
Oh,
So,
okay.
and
I
I'm
see.
with a tiny indie press,
Nice.
and that's what they use for it.
Okay.
Uh, but it was so cool. I think I got them. I guess it was 5 or 6 days after release, and I got them, and then it was like a Friday, and I stayed up super late with like my book, and I went and I read my favorite scenes again, and it was so private, and it was so cool, and it was like that was the magic because I wanted to read the story. And I was so
Mhm.
excited that it was packaged in such a way that it was everything I sort of imagined it to be.
Sure.
Um, and it's cool because I can show you now. Of course, I have my books. Um,
Yeah.
but I had these like, so here's the cover,
Yes.
and then I got these illustrations. It's kind of hard to
Oh.
see.
No, no, I that's beautiful.
And then each chapter, hold on a second, is Galileo's phases of the moon, and it's got them on top,
Oh,
not on the
that's
Kindle.
so cool.
And it's almost like a flip book because I tried my best to get them in the correct order.
Yes.
Um, and I chose the font for very specific reasons. Like I wanted the packaging to be as full of intent and intention as the writing was. So when I saw it all together, instead of just having it on a screen where there's like a digital proof,
Mm-hmm.
I was like, yes, this is exactly what I wanted. And it was, I don't know. And I wrote the story for myself at first. So it was really cool to just page through and entertain myself again.
Sure.
It was it was magical.
Yeah, it is a hard to put into words sometimes. That first feeling, but I'm glad that you finally got those,
Oh my
you
gosh.
know,
I was
those
so
proofs. You can
anxious.
have it. Yeah. Now
And
there
there's
will be a
still
time.
delays. Ugh,
Oh, well,
it's a whole thing.
that's frustrating. But in a year or two,
Mhm.
I want you to go back and read Bloodborne, like just because you're working on other things, and
Right.
then the experience of rereading your book, because by then you're going to have moved on. You're going to be a much different
Mhm.
writer in a couple years than you were the
Yes.
first book. I mean, I can tell now during this fifth book, even though it's only the second of the cozy series, I'm more confident in my prose because this is my fifth book, so I
Mhm.
have a little bit better grasp of what I'm doing. But when I had to read the first book all over again to write the sequel because like I had forgotten everything. Like it's been a
Makes
couple years.
sense.
I've worked on other books. Like, you set it out in the world and it's just like a baby, it's a kid, like it's just gone.
Right.
and it's living on its own or it's not. And so I read it again, like I was like waiting for the cringe, like, oh. And it really wasn't that cringy. I was like, oh, there are a couple
That's
things where I would
awesome.
have like rewritten, like, that's a little schmaltzy here, Mark. Like, come on.
Right.
But there was more of that, like, oh, this is this is actually written pretty well. And like, but I didn't remember writing it. Like, I know I did. I mean, I was
You're
the one
such in
on
the
the keyboard.
zone. Hmm.
Yeah, you're right. But like seeing it so much after the fact, like it's done, and going back to revisit it will be a whole different kind of transcendent experience for you. And yeah, that's going to be a unique pleasure all of its own.
And it's been great because I had 6 ARC readers and they were so incredible. They're all authors I admire, and they pulled out things of the book that like quotations or themes or whatever. I'm like, same thing. I wrote that? Like that's really cool. And you
Yes.
have these little sparks of, I think it's when your brain is at completely at rest that
Mhm.
your inspiration can come up with all sorts of things that even can impress you. And I love
Yeah.
that. I love that about the writing process. And then I'm starting to get reviews of readers who are early readers who weren't like, I guess that's the weird thing. For so long, you choose who reads your book. Like you choose your beta readers,
Mhm.
you choose like the early edition readers. And once it's out in the world, like anyone,
Right.
anyone at all can bring it up. And
Yeah.
I had my first uh, unchosen review, and it was so cool to read. It was,
Mhm.
I don't know, it was really special, and it brought up things that I kind of forgot or
Sure.
like wasn't conscious of at the time.
Yeah. And that's great. Congratulations on that. That's a really wonderful feeling. You're going to get more of that.
Thank
And
you. I'm excited
it,
about that. Yeah.
yeah, I've gotten some of the same response on my first book. Again, this cozy is not a genre I normally write in, so it was just like a
Uh huh.
mystery, like, you know. But as a writer, it was a challenge, and I'm enjoying it. It's a lot more enjoyable than I thought it would be. Um, and but to see reader response, like they're reading into it things, they're getting things that you didn't really intend, or they're seeing things that they relate to, characters they relate to, or
Hmm.
people like who I don't know who are buying it and like leaving comments on Amazon, like, what's a person in France? How did this person get a hold of my book? And like read it, like, what is up with that? And
Right.
it's just so like, oh my God, that you're just I'm so grateful that people are willing to take a chance and plunk down some money to like read something. And it's so easy to like tear someone down. I mean, you're gonna get the 1-star
Right.
review. You're gonna get it. Just accept it and embrace it, because you're gonna
I'm
join a
more
fine club.
terrified. I'm more terrified of the 3-star review because the 1-star review you can kind of dismiss, but the
Yeah,
three
especially when
star
they don't
review
say anything.
means they like,
Well,
right. It's just,
I got a 3-star review on Toxic. The person was like writing about it in glowing terms, like, as someone who suffered through religious trauma, I get this and blah blah blah. And then he was like,
mhm.
this is great, this is great, this is great. But I'm like, why 3-star? Because he's just, the 3-star was like, because too many f-bombs. And I'm like, I wrote back
That's
to him, I
almost like a
go,
badge of
I
honor.
know, I wrote back to him, I go, what's the fucking problem with that? you know I never heard
I love
back,
that.
but I thought, okay, if that's why I'm getting 3 stars and not 4,
Right.
then I'm okay with that. Yeah. And so that's fine. And you can't please everyone. I mean, ultimately you have to write for
Right.
yourself, and you have to be happy with what you've done. And as a writer, it's like that's all you can do. And you hope that people like it and you hope that it resonates, but you never know what's going to strike or what's not. Um,
For sure.
that's
And
gonna
I think I started it like not just for myself, but like to entertain my friends.
mhm.
And like I started thinking very specifically early on of my target reader. And when I focused on a target reader, that was a kind of research. It made it easier to dismiss, like my parents read some of it. They bowed out pretty early because it's
Sure,
not their
right.
thing.
My parents won't even read my other books. They just like,
Oh my gosh, I'm
nope.
working on a dark romance right now. It's very explicit. It is very dark. And I'm like, I'm glad they're like bowing out with Bloodborne, so
Okay.
they won't even read that one.
Yeah. Yeah.
But I think when I envision my target reader, it helped me like not even pay attention to people. I mean, I always pay attention to people, but not even pay attention to the opinions of like anyone who didn't fit what I was sort of like envisioning in my head. I want to take people's criticism into consideration. Like that's really important to me. Um, but yeah, I want it to land in the right spot and entertain the right reader
Mhm.
and whoever self-identifies with the story. Like that's who I want to connect with.
Sure. Yeah, it's gonna find its
Every author is
audience.
probably like that. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would think so. And you're writing in a pretty popular genre.
Mm-hmm.
And no, I get it. It's a good sell, and it's a great title, but Bloodborne. You have so much imagery that comes with it. It's such a naturally beautiful imagery in the dark and the gothic, and it's a big genre, and I like that, and I'm excited because this is, you know, early early feedback because this just came
Yes.
out recently. So yeah, this is
Valentine's
exciting.
Day. Yep.
Yeah, what a great day for it to come out. That's perfect. I love that.
It was super intentional.
Yes.
And I was interviewed for Vampire Magazine back in the fall.
Vampire. There's a
And
magazine?
yes, there
Vampire?
is.
Oh
There is.
wow.
Spelled with a
That's
Y.
that's awesome.
Yeah. And I was interviewed for that. And it was like a 6-page interview. It was crazy. In the middle of the magazine. I thought it was supposed to come out in April, but the interview gods were shining upon me and it came out release week. So it's just
Oh,
that was really special to
sure.
have that put together and as part of like there was the build up and then to have like all these things rolling out and surprises for readers. We did this like my publisher and I did uh, this thing I've never seen, but we sell bundles with the hardcover copies, and there are things like there's the Mina Hearts Lucy bundle, and it's got these bath salts that look like blood when you put them in your bath,
Oh, that's
and it's
great.
got a copy of Dracula, and
Oh,
then like an autographed version of my book to really like amp up the enthusiasm and make it more of a
yes.
special occasion.
That's fun. I
Super
like
fun,
that. Yes, that's great. What do you plan on doing, like book shows? Like when you want to go out there? I know with the pandemic out there, it's kind of hard. Hopefully things
tricky.
are getting better. But do you ever plan like doing live events and selling at book shows or those kinds of things?
In Philadelphia, at my favorite cemetery on the planet, I love cemeteries, of course. It's Laurel Hill Cemetery, and they have this market of the macabre. And I went last year, and it's all these like spooky vendors. And one of the vendors had like vampire steaks that they hand whittled. So it's the coolest thing.
That's
So I just
awesome.
this week applied to have a booth there
Yeah.
for my book. And then I have a friend who writes werewolf fiction who lives in West Virginia, and he's considering driving up for it.
Yeah.
And then
And
I
you can
plan
prove that you
on
can get along. It's not like Underworld. The Lycans and the
right. It's
undead,
not
they
like
can they can get along. Come on.
what we do in the shadows. Like I'm not like heckling.
Yes. That is played up so much in the TV show. Oh my God.
Oh,
Yes.
awesome,
You need to
awesome.
see that. Okay.
So that's a live event, and then I don't know. It's like you said, it's been tricky with the pandemic.
Yeah.
But I've been adapting to all of the like social media ways that I can
Yeah.
have. Like I did a Q&A with my publisher for release week. And then I have a friend who's writing this incredible book. It's gothic fiction. She's Filipina, and it's set in the Philippines, and it has Filipino folklore in it.
Oh,
And it's this
nice.
scary gothic, whatever.
Yeah.
And so she and I are going to do a discussion. Um, and it's just so cool to be able to connect with other writers. And that's the kind of content I'm planning on having in the future.
Well, that's great. The Philippines is one of the few areas that I've not seen horror films from. So not since
No,
like the
it's all
1960s.
fresh
There's
to me.
one from like the 60s where it was like about a snake cult. But that was like when I was a child. but yeah, there's a few areas, Indonesia, Philippines. There are a few areas that I've not seen horror from that I came across an Indonesian horror film, like and like an Indian horror film. Like I need to see these because I love Bollywood stuff. So let's
Mhm.
see a Bollywood horror film. I want to see this, you know.
Awesome.
No, that's great. Like your vampire, your your festival. There's a Bigfoot festival, a Sasquatch festival in Ohio.
Yes.
And
I
I
love it. I
know,
love Bigfoot like
yeah.
lore.
Oh, great. My second movie, I've done 3 movies. You can see my posters in the back for 2 of them. My second movie was called Sorority Sisters versus Sasquatch. And it
Incredible.
was
What a
like a
title.
yeah, it's like a late 70s exploitation movie, And I thought about bringing it there just because like
That'd be
if you're
cool.
gonna have a Bigfoot festival, I mean, I've got the movie,
Right. Just for you.
yeah.
So
No, I love that. That's great that you want to do
I'm
this.
trying to find ways to connect to an audience in a virtual
Yeah,
way.
sure.
And then as things start opening up, I'm open-minded to doing like in-person things.
Yeah,
It's hard to find right now. So that's like
it
a
is. It
work
is
in
really
progress.
hard. There's a group I go through here in Ohio, in the area where I'm at, and they do shows like probably 48 weeks a year. They tend to take some time off, of course, but now they're back up and they're making sure you show up, you wear a mask, and the venues are all very
Fun.
well and ventilated and things like that.
Oh,
And I
not like a horror mask. I was picturing like a werewolf
no,
mask.
no, 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 just a
Like a clinical mask.
yeah, just like an
Medical.
N95. No, everyone's masking. No, it's not a horror thing. It's actually like craft shows, and those kinds of
Cool.
things, which I found, especially when I was selling my cozy, this is like the perfect place for the demographic to come in. Around Christmas, people are looking for things. But now that I've got a couple pulps and I'll have the second cozy out, it's just nice to see like indie writers and people just want to support it.
Right.
And people will come to like ask for donations for a local library, and I'm happy to give them a copy. It's like if someone picks up a copy of my book in a library and reads it, I'm happy. That's great.
That's
you
awesome.
know um
And the next thing that's actually up on the calendar, I'm not able to attend, but my publisher got a booth at the LA Times Book Festival.
oh,
And
nice.
that's like 100,000 people
Hmm.
go there.
It's
Um,
probably a
it,
$10,000 booth for the weekend.
I don't know how, like, one
Yeah.
of the poets with my publisher works for some sort of affiliate company or whatever.
Okay.
Um, so that, I mean, the exposure is incredible.
Yes,
And I'm excited that I feel like my publisher is really like in my corner and she wants to promote my book as much as
that's
I do.
awesome. That's
So to
awesome.
have that kind of exposure in person,
Yeah,
you
that's
can't beat it.
amazing. No, you really can't. Because that's when you get like you want to get the banner behind you. You want to get the big
Mm-hmm.
placards and stuff like that. And you got to get some really nice like blood red ink pens to sign. You
Oh, that's a
gotta,
great idea.
yeah, you gotta do
I
that.
never thought of that. Maybe I'll do, because I've
I'm
been
gonna
practicing my signature, but maybe I should get like a red Sharpie. That would be really
I
cool.
I'm gonna share. I used a Pilot G2 Pro. It's a nice like ink gel, and it's got a nice rubber grippy so you don't get sore. And you can buy ink in all kinds of colors, but a Sharpie could work as well.
See, I'm a
That would work.
lefty, so I have to
Okay,
choose pens really specifically.
sure, that makes sense.
How weird is that? But
No, it
it,
makes total sense. And you
it
want
was
to which
super.
page you want to sign on too, because you got to tilt it a
Mhm.
different way. Yes, no, I get it. It makes sense. But I was
It
just
was
thinking the
very
Sharpie might bleed
surreal.
through. Well, I don't know if you want it to bleed through the page or not, but that's yeah.
It's a little bit of bleeding is not bad in my book.
I would expect that. I just have a few more questions and
Yeah,
we'll
sure.
wrap up. But this has been thoroughly enjoyable. Um,
I've had so much fun. Yeah,
good.
I like talking about. I feel like you and I have a lot in common, which is so
Yes.
cool.
Yes, and none of this was planned or known ahead of time. The only thing I knew about
No, not
you
at all.
is that you grew up near Cleveland. I'm like, okay, well, that was good. What is your writer fantasy?
Like, what would I want it to turn into?
Yeah, like when you think about now that you're on this road to writing, like when you fantasize, like what you would like to accomplish, like where does it go? Where does like, yeah, my writer fantasy is to accomplish this.
I want someone to write fanfic about my character, like on Wattpad or something. That would be a
Yeah.
dream. And I know it's not like a completely audacious dream, but to have someone connect in such a real way,
Yeah.
um, I would take that. I mean, I would love any award or whatever, but I would take that over any
Yeah.
kind of success.
Because that shows passion
Mhm.
and dedication in a way that if you're gonna inspiring them to write and they love and know your character so well that they want to continue their story in their own way, I mean, goodness gracious, that's awesome.
And I think I can have that feeling because it's not my primary occupation.
Sure.
I think if I were to try and make a living out of this as an indie writer, that's
Yeah.
a huge challenge,
Not gonna happen.
pretty much.
Yeah.
And then I think B, it really keeps that purity to the passion.
Mhm.
And I'm not dismissing writers who have giant contracts with huge publishers.
Yeah, good
Like
for them. If you can land it
that's
right, why
incredible.
not? Yeah, good
Hmm.
for them. Yeah, we're not knocking anybody down. There's no competition. It's just most writers are
Right.
not going to make money. And if you know anything about the state of the industry, most books sell about 200 copies a year. I'm talking big publisher books, and most books
Hmm.
sell fewer than 1,000 copies in their lifetime. So the
Yep.
writer's advance, you get $5,000, you're probably not going to make that back, or you're probably not going to
Correct.
make more than that. So indie writing, that's why I like indie writing. You get all the control and
Mhm.
all those things. It's like I have a better chance of making that more money through indie writing because I make more money per sale,
Oh
than
yeah.
I
I mean
have. Yeah.
the royalties alone. Like
Yeah.
if you're self-publishing, even with a small indie press, the royalties have like I negotiated mine and it's astonishing compared to my friends who are with Penguin or Simon and
Yeah. They
Schuster or
get
whatever.
10%, maybe 10% of the
Hmm.
cover
And a
price.
lot of people don't know that.
Yeah.
Like I
Yeah.
didn't understand it until I started researching
Yeah.
publishing.
And then it
Um,
only kicks in like after, well, you get the advance and then hopefully you'll
right.
sell enough to make sure then you pay more, then you get more on top of that if the book sells well,
I
but
just broke even. So that's awesome for
well,
my
good for
publisher.
you. Good for you.
Yeah, so everything was covered, the, cover artist, the cost of, like, putting it together or whatever. So I was really happy, and everything else is just frosting on the cake.
Sure.
Like, great for me, yeah.
Excellent. Good for you. So what
Thanks.
advice would you give anyone who wants to write?
I would say stop writing fiction for a couple years and only write poetry,
Oh,
because I feel like there's something about I mean, of course, it's, like, facetious, but there's something about poetry where you're being so efficient with language and you don't have space to mess around and it has to pack a punch. And I feel like each chapter that you write in fiction really has to be super impactful. So that's kind of my advice. And I guess the other bit of advice is like I block out very specifically um, any sort of negative critique. Not for my own work, like I want for beta feedback, like I want people to essentially tear it apart. But like all of this bashing of tropes and super negative reviews and when people gang up on an author, um, I very intentionally block all that out so that when I'm writing, it can be like my own experience.
mhm.
And then I guess like read what you love and that will inspire it. Like that will inspire what you write. And you can trust all the stuff that you've read, all the things that you've seen, all the ways that you've studied language, and like trust yourself because it's there. Like when we
Yeah.
were talking about, you write things you don't even recognize. It's, I think that those moments happen when you trust what's happening, like
Mhm.
yourself and your style.
Yeah. The
And I guess just
voice, as
getting to
they
know,
say.
mhm,
Oh, sorry.
and getting to know yourself really well.
Yeah.
Um, I'm probably giving too much advice, but
No, no, no. It's great. No, it's. I'm like right there with you. I agree with everything you say because that's what the first thing they'll tell you in a creative writing class. Two things:
Mhm.
write what you know, and then learn how to develop that voice, how you want to say things the way you want to say them. Because we all imitate at first, and then we learn over time to say things how we want to say them, and we're always influenced. Like you're talking about your poetry. I'm gonna guess. Are you a Lovecraft fan? at all? Have you ever read
A
much?
little bit.
Okay.
Have not read a ton, but it was
Okay.
really funny. I have a 4-year-old son, and my brother sent him a little board book when he was a baby called C is for Cthulhu.
Yes, it's wonderful. Yes. That's a good
So
way
he
to
was
introduce them to the elder gods, you know?
exactly.
Yeah,
We
why
need to
not?
do this for our
Every
children.
4-year-old should have that book.
And so it sort of reignited this like interest in Lovecraft and
Yeah.
just that era of writing.
Yes. It's
It's
the
awesome.
dense language. It's a very stylized language. I used to teach it
Mhm.
in my intro to horror class, and I would sneak it into my English classes too. So yeah, it's great. I had a student who was a rabid Twilight fan. I'm not sure where you stand. I don't want to get into political things here.
Uh, I would say vague affection.
Okay.
I don't hate it. I'm not
Yeah.
wild about it. I just,
Yeah.
yeah,
It for
okay.
me, it was like, no, it's just these aren't vampires. I'm sorry, no sparkling glitter here. So she
Right.
came up to me after class. We'd read like 6 stories called Cthulhu and things like that. And she came up to me. She said, "Professor Justice." I go, "What?" She was concerned. She's like, "I'm never going to be able to read Twilight again." And I go, "You're welcome." So she's like,
Good for
I
you.
can't read her prose now because she just hadn't read anything that was written at such a level that Lovecraft, his language is like so elevated. And I said, "Well, I mean, you could still love Twilight. It's okay." I said, "But Lovecraft is really an experience. He's not everyone's cup of tea. I mean, some people get really
Correct.
turned off by him, and I'm not even talking about his ideas. I just like his language. I think I love his concepts. This kind of
Mhm.
bleak, completely nihilistic way of looking at humanity is kind of beautiful in its starkness, So
And the extreme inventiveness, I think. And I love with the Necronomicon that like people have written that. Like it didn't actually exist.
yeah.
And then like people assume that it's like a real thing.
Yeah, well, he
And I
supposedly
love that.
wrote it. I mean, he supposedly had written the Necronomicon. Yes, I
But
had
then
it. Yeah, I had a
that's like
copy.
apocryphal too. Like
Right. Exactly. Like
whether
he
he wrote it
supposedly
or like
written it. Right. No one knows. Right. It's by
I love the mystique.
The mad Arab Al Shazarat or something like that.
Uh-huh.
Um, yeah, that was part of the mystique. Like
Hmm.
I was in undergrad and like had written this poem about uh this wizard trapping or this alchemist or something trapping a demon in a jar, and I had written this like spell and
Love it.
incantation like in the poem, and someone had mentioned this, the Necronomicon. I'm like, oh, what is that? I'll go get that, and reading it,
Good.
I'm like, ooh, this is kind of spooky. And then only later on finding out about the history of it and like, oh, Lovecraft, I think, probably wrote this, or someone inspired by Lovecraft, because he
Hmm.
himself talks about these things. I'm like, oh, okay. And that made it all the more wonderful, for me as a reader. Like, oh, this is great. I felt like I was seeing the wizard at first, and then the curtain got drawn, and now I'm seeing the guy from Kansas, or the man behind the curtain. It,
Right, right.
it's kind of wonderful. Um,
And I love that you have such a passion for teaching and have such a cool education in writing. Because it's really hard to pivot from, I think, having a formal education in writing to writing and finishing a novel and having it published. Like there's so many untrained writers who make a big splash and are awesome writers. Um, but I think academia, in a way, can be intimidating because you expect when you graduate to have it like so poetic and so literary.
mm-hmm.
Um, Sorry about that.
That's okay.
There we
There we are.
go. uh, so I think it's great to have that formal background. And I think that's why I wrote my first novel in like 2 months because
Mm-hmm.
it all just came back.
Mm-hmm.
But I find it so special when I talk to people who've done academic writing and then do it like semi-professionally. It's cool.
Thank
Like
you.
it's nice to have to share that background.
Yeah, well, thank you. I'm actually finishing up a graduate program right now, again through Bowling Green,
Oh, awesome.
in technical writing. Because
Oh, that's such a cool like
yeah,
industry. It's an awesome industry.
yeah. So I'm excited. I love plain language. That's my thing. Keep it simple, stupid. And exactly. And there's, excuse me. So getting away from the jargon and legalese of academic writing, which is so prevalent today.
Mm-hmm.
It's like now I can't stand all that. I understand the need for jargon and why it's there, but I kicked against it for so long. Like I came in like this with piss and vinegar and like a chip on my shoulder, like, and now I understand it better, but I still love plain language. And I simply just want to make a writing or living writing. And that will enable me to do that and still also have
Perfect
time to
field.
write. Yeah. So I'm
Mm-hmm.
excited about wherever it takes me. I'm excited about. So yeah, this is going to be fun. So, and the last question, Stephanie,
Sure.
can you tell us where we can find your books?
You can find my books on Barnes and Noble. You can order them from your local bookstore, like whichever indie bookstore you love. Uh, it's not on the shelf in Barnes and Noble. You have to actually order it. You can find it through my publisher. I'll probably tag them when I post this, but they're called Curious Corvid, also from Ohio. They're like up
Nice.
in Geneva, which is so funny.
Oh, okay.
Um, Curious Corvid has autographed hardcovers and softbacks. And then on Amazon, it's been a little bit of a mess. You can get the Kindle copy right away.
Okay.
The other ones, there's a little bit of a backlog. So if people are interested in grabbing a physical copy, I'd say either my publisher or Barnes & Noble right now.
Okay.
And the Kindle copy, I feel like came out great, but you're missing out, I think, on all the pretty packaging that's
Yeah.
in the hardcover.
There's nothing better than holding a book in your hands. It's, um, I love the ability to have on my tablet like 10,000 books. I've got a library. I'll
Mm-hmm.
never read these books on my tablet,
I know.
but I have them. I can. That's the idea. Like I can have them if I can want, can read them. So I understand that, but there is nothing better than the smell of a book, the feel of a book, and just sitting back and just opening up and just letting yourself and be immersed in that. So I totally get that. It goes back. I mean, I guess I have to thank my parents for reading to me from the inside the womb and giving me a good life and love of words and passion for books. And so,
Yeah,
and so
my parents were big readers. They still are. Um, and yeah, I'm the same way. Like it was home and then like library and local bookstore, like those
mhm.
little indie bookstores that are like little nooks and crannies filled with books and weird
Yes.
ladders. And
Yeah, the
that
used
just,
bookstores, right.
there's so much magic. Yeah.
Yeah, we had a bookseller near us, and there were probably 10, 15,000 books. And I would just go there on weekends and like, what else? I would get my Robert E. Howard books, or I find
Hmm.
bought my Dune series on the cheap, and yeah, no, I totally get it. I totally understand. Uh, I'm getting ready to do my commercial as my outro, but Stephanie, thank you so much for being on the show. I have had a wonderful time getting to know you as a person, as a writer, and I'm so very excited for where your career goes.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to do this interview. It felt like really natural. It did, like you said, it felt like a conversation. So,
Good.
and we got to nerd out about Ray Harryhausen.
Yeah, I know.
You can't
Again,
go wrong.
no, obviously, no, you can't. You cannot in any way, shape, or form. So this is great. You've been watching and listening to Between the Lines. You can listen to us on unsaneradio.com, listen to full episodes, or download to your device. You can watch us on our YouTube page, Between the Lines Podcast. If you're watching, that's where you're at. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button. And if you know someone who'd like us, tell them about us. And if you are a writer and would like to join me for a chat, email me at betweenthelines54@yahoo.com, betweenthelines54@yahoo.com. And Stephanie, here's my cheesy line.
Yes.
See you next time, Between the Lines.
I love it. Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was a joy, utter joy.